Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everyone. Last we left off, our intrepid hero tried to make a break for it, I think. As I recall, anyway. Yeah, because what's their name? Somebody. Yeah, one of the main character's friends tried to convince him to, actually do something about what is happening. And then he tried, and then it didn't work. So now we go into chapter 19 and figure out just what the heck the antagonist feels about that. Chapter 19, in the Z-Light, though.
Try again. By the infernal, Snapdeed, if you do anything to balk us.
Miko scanned the apparatus with keen eyes. How much technical knowledge of signaling instruments did this brigand leader have? I was tense and cold with apprehension as I sat in a corner of the helio room watching Snap. Could Miko be fooled? Snap, I knew, was trying to fool him. The moon spread close beneath us. My log chart, computed up to 30 minutes past, showed us barely some 30,000 miles over the moon's surface. The globe lay in quadrature beneath our bow quarter, a huge quadrant spreading across the dark, starry vault of the lower heavens, a silver quadrant. The sunset caught the lunar mountains, flung slanting shadows over the empty lunar plains. All the disk was plainly visible. The mellow earthlight glowed serene and pale to illumine the silver night. The Planetara was bathed in it. A brilliant silver glare swept the forward deck, clean white and splashed with black shadows. We'd partly circled the moon so as now to approach it from the earthward side. I'd worked with extreme concentration through the last few hours, plotting the trajectory of our curving sweep, setting the gravity plates with constantly shifting combinations, and with it a necessity for the steady slowing of our velocity. Miko, for a time, was at my elbow in the turret. I hadn't seen Coniston and Han of recent hours. I'd slept, awakened refreshed, and had a meal. Coniston and Han had remained below, one or the either of them, always remaining with the crew to execute my sirened orders. Then Coniston came to take my place in the turret, and I went with Miko to the helio room.
You're skillful, Haljan.
A measure of grim approval was in Miko's voice.
You evidently have no wish to try and fool me in this navigation.
I hadn't indeed. It was delicate work at best, coping with the intricacies of celestial mechanics upon a semicircular trajectory. With slowing velocity and with a makeshift crew, we easily could have come upon some real difficulty. We hung at last, hull down, facing the earthward hemisphere of the lunar disk. The giant ball of the earth lay behind and above us, and the sun was over our stern quarter. With forward velocity almost checked, we poised, and Snap began his signals to the unsuspecting Grantline. My work momentarily was over. I sat watching the helio room, and Moa was here, close beside me. I felt always her watchful gaze, so that even the play of my expression needed re-ining. Re-ining. I read it as re-ining because it's, oh, sci-fi, that word doesn't make sense, oh well. No. My expression needed reining. It's a real word. Good job. Flawless victory. Anyway, I felt always her watchful gaze, so that even the play of my expression needed reining. Miko worked with Snap, and Anita was here too. To Miko and Moa it was the somber, taciturn George Prince, shrouded always in his black mourning cloak, disinclined to talk, sitting alone and brooding and cowardly sullen.
By the infernal, if you try to fool me, Snapdeed.
The small metal room with its grid floor and low-arched ceiling glared with moonlight through its windows. The moving figures of Snap and Miko were aped by the grotesque, misshapen shadows of them on the walls. Miko was gigantic, a giant, menacing ogre. Snap was small and alert, a trim, pale figure in his tight-fitting white trousers, broad flowing belt, and his white shirt open at the throat. His face was pale and drawn from lack of sleep and the torture to which Miko had subjected him. But he grinned at the brigand's words and pushed his straggling hair up. But he grinned at the brigand's words and pushed his straggling hair closer under the red eye shade. I'm doing my best, Miko, you can believe it. The room over long periods was deadly silent, and Miko and Snap were bending watchfully at the crowded banks of instruments. A silence in which my own pounding heart seemed to echo. I didn't dare look at Anita, nor she at me. Snap was trying to signal Earth, not the moon. His main helios were set in the reverse. The infrared waves, flung from the bow window, were of a frequency which Snap and I believed that Grantline couldn't pick up. And over against the wall, close beside me, and seemingly ignored by Snap, there was a tiny ultraviolet sender. Its faint hum and the quivering of its mirrors had so far passed unnoticed. Would some Earth station pick it up? I prayed so. There was a thumbnail mirror here which could bring an answer, and I prayed that it might swing. Would some Earth telescope be able to see us? I doubted it. The pinpoint of the Planetara's infinitesimal bulk would be beyond them. Long silences grew, broken only by the faint hiss and murmur of Snap's instruments. Shall I try the graphs, Miko?
Yes.
I helped him with the spectroheliograph. At every level, the plates showed us nothing save the scarred and pitted moon surface. We worked for an hour, and there was nothing. Bleak, cold night on the moon here was beneath us. A touch of fading sunlight upon the Apennines. Up near the South Pole, Tycho, with its radiating open rills, stood open like a grim, dark maw. Miko bent over a plate.
Something here. Is it there?
An abnormality among the frowning, ragged cliffs of Tycho? We thought so, but then it seemed not. Another hour passed, and no signal came from Earth. If Snap's calls were getting through, we had no evidence of it. Abruptly, Miko strode at me from across the room, and I went cold and tense, and Moa shifted, alert to my every movement. But Miko wasn't interested in me. A sweep of his clenched fist knocked the ultraviolet sender and its coils and mirrors, and a tinkling crash to the grid at my feet.
We don't need that, whatever it is.
He rubbed his knuckles where the violet waves had tinged them, and turned grimly back to Snap.
Where are your gamma ray mirrors? If treasure is exposed...
This Martian's knowledge was far greater than we believed, anyway. He grinned sardonically at Anita.
If our treasure is on this hemisphere, Prince, we should pick up gamma rays. Don't you think so? Or is Grantline so cautious it'll all be protected?
Anita spoke in a careful, throaty drawl. The gamma rays came plain enough when we passed here on the way out.
Well, you should know. An expert eavesdropper, Prince. I'll say that for you. Come, Dean. Try something else. If Grantline doesn't signal us, I'll be likely to blame you. My patience is shortening. Shall we go closer, Aljan?
I don't think it would help.
Perhaps not. Are we checked?
Yes. We were poised and very nearly motionless. If you wish in advance, I can ring it, but we need a surface destination now.
That's true, Aljan. Would a Z-ray penetrate those crater cliffs? Tycho, for instance, at this angle.
Hang on, there's a footnote. Let's see what that's about. An allusion to the use of Z-ray light for making spectrophotographs of what might be behind obscuring rock masses, similar to an old-style X-ray. That's what a Z-ray is. So he's basically asking, can we X-ray those rocks to see if there's something in them? It might. You think you might be on the northern inner side of Tycho?
You may be anywhere.
If you think that, suppose we swing the Planetara over the South Pole, Tycho viewed from there,
and take another quarter day of time. Flash on your Z-ray. Help him look it up, Aljan.
I moved to the lens box of the spectroheliograph. It seemed that Snap was very strangely reluctant. Was it because he knew that the Grantline camp lay concealed on the north inner wall of Tycho's giant ring? I thought so, but Snap flashed a strange look at Anita. She didn't see it, but I did, and I couldn't understand it. My accursed witless incapacity, if only I'd taken warning.
Here, a score of graphs with the Z-ray. Tell you I'll comb the surface if we have to stay here until our ship comes for Farak Shan to join us.
The Martian brigands were coming. Miko's signals had been answered. In 10 days, the other brigand ship, adequately manned and armed, would be here. Snap helped me connect the Z-Ray. He didn't dare even whisper to me. At least not with Moa hovering always so close. And for all Miko's sardonic smiling, we knew that he'd tolerate nothing from us now. He was fully armed, and so was Moa. I recalled that Snap several times tried to touch me significantly. Oh, if only I'd taken warning. We finished our connecting, and the dull gray point of Z-Ray gleamed through the prisms to mingle with the moonlight entering the main lens. I stood with the shutter trip. The same interval, Snap? Yeah. Beside me, I was aware of a faint reflection in the Z-light, a gray cathedral shaft crossing the helio room and falling upon the opposite wall. An unreality there, as the Z-light faintly strove to penetrate the metal room side. Shall I make the exposure? Snap nodded, but that graph was never made. An exclamation from Moa made us all turn, and the gamma mirrors were quivering. Grantline had picked up our signals. With what undoubtedly was an intensified receiving equipment, which Snap had not thought Grantline able to use, he'd caught our faint Z-rays, which Snap was sending only to deceive Miko. And Grantline had recognized the Planetara and released his occulting screens surrounding the radiomore. The gamma rays were here, and unmistakable. And upon their heels came Grantline's message. Not in the secret system he'd arranged with Snap, but unsuspectingly, in open code. I could read the swinging mirror, and so could Miko. And Miko decoded it, triumphantly around. Surprised but pleased your return. Wait, no, this is a message, so we gotta use the message voice.
Surprised but pleased your return. Approach mid-northern hemisphere, region of Archimedes, 40,000 toises off the nearest Appian range.
How much is a toys? It explains. A toys is about 50 miles, so that tells me that 40,000 toises, that's 80,000 miles. The message broke off, but even its importance was overshadowed. Miko stood in the center of the helio room, triumphantly reading the light indicator. Its beam swung on the scale, which chanced to be almost directly over. Miko stood in the center of the helio room, triumphantly reading the light indicator. Its beam swung on the scale, which chanced to be almost directly over Anita's head. I saw Miko's expression change, and a look of surprise and amazement came to him. Why? He gaped, and he stood staring, almost stupidly staring for an instant. And as I regarded him with a fascinated horror, there came upon his heavy gray face a look of dawning comprehension. I heard Snap's startled intake of breath, and he moved to the spectroheliograph, where the Z-ray connections were still humming. But with a leap, Miko flung him away.
Off with you. Moa, watch him. Hojan, don't move.
Again, Miko stood staring. Oh, good Hylia, I now saw that he was staring at Anita.
Why, George Prince, how strange you look.
Anita didn't move. She was stricken with horror. She shrank back against the wall, huddled in her cloak, and Miko's sardonic voice came again.
How strange you look, Prince.
He took a step forward. He was grim, calm, terribly so, deliberate, gloating, like a great gray monster in human form, toying with a fascinated, imprisoned bird.
Move just a little, Prince. Let the Z-ray light fall more fully.
Anita's head was bare, that pale, Hamlet-like face. Good heavens, the Z-light reflection lay gray and penetrating upon it. And Miko took another step, peering, grinning.
How amazing, George Prince. Why, I can hardly believe it.
Moa was armed with an electronic cylinder. For all her amazement, what turgid emotions sweeping her I could only guess, she never took her eyes from Snap and me. "Back! Don't move, either of you!" she hissed at us, and then Miko leaped at Anita like a giant gray leopard pouncing.
Away with that cloak, Prince.
I stood cold and numb, and realization came at last. The faint Z-like glow had fallen by chance upon Anita's face, penetrated the flesh, exposed, faintly glowing, the bone line of her jaw, and unmasked the waxen art of Glutz. And Miko had seen it.
Why, George, how surprising. Away with that cloak.
He seized her wrist, drew her forward, and beyond the shaft of Z-light, into the brilliant light of the moon, and ripped her cloak from her. The gentle curves of her figure were so unmistakable, and as Miko gazed upon them, all his calm triumph swept away.
Why, Anita.
I heard Moa mutter, "So that's it? So that's it?" A venomous flashing look from Anita and I. "Why, Anita?" Miko's great arms gathered her up, as though she were a child.
So I have you back from the dead delivered back to me.
"Greg," came Snap's warning, and his grip over my shoulders brought me a measure of sanity. I had tensed to spring, and I stood quivering. Moa thrust her weapon against my face. The helium mirrors were swaying again with another message from Grantline, but it came ignored by us all. In the glare of the moonlight by the forward window, Miko held Anita, his great hands pawing her with triumphant, possessive caresses.
So, little Anita, you're given back to me.
Against her futile struggles, he held her. Good heavens, if only I had had the wit to prevent this. Now we come to Chapter 20, the Grantline Camp. Just a moment, I want to see how many chapters we have left. Okay, the last chapter is 22, and then it looks like we may have one or two more stories. In the mid-northern hemisphere, upon the earthward side of the moon, the giant crater of Archimedes stood brooding in silent majesty. Grim, lofty walls, broken, pitted, and scarred, rising precipitous to the upper circular rim. Night had just fallen, and the sunlight clung to the crater heights. It tinged with flame the jagged peaks of the Appian Mountains, which rose in tiers at the horizon, and it flung great inky shadows over the intervening lowlands. Northward, the Mare Imbrium stretched mysterious and purple, its million rills and ridges and crater holes flattened by distance in the gathering darkness into a seemingly level surface. The night slowly deepened, and the dead black vault of the sky blazed with its brilliant starry gems. The gibbous earth hung high above the horizon, motionless, save for the invisible pendulum sway over the tiny arc of its liberation, widening in a quadrature, casting upon the bleak, naked lunar landscape its mellow earth glow. What a slow, measured process, this coming of the lunar night. For an Earth day, the sunset slowly faded on the Appians. The poised Earth widened a little further, an Earth day of time, with the Earth disk visibly rotating, the faint tracery of its oceans and continents passing in slow, majestic review. Another Earth day interval, and then another, and then another. Full night now enveloped Archimedes. Splotches of Earthlight and starlight slowly shifted as the night advanced. Between the great crater and the nearby mountains, broken, sway-to-level lowlands lay wan in the Earth light. A few hundred miles as distance would be measured upon Earth anyway. A million rills were here, valleys and ridges, ravines, sharp-walled canyons, cliffs and crags, tiny craters like pockmarks. Gray, porous rock everywhere, this denuded landscape, cracked and scarred and tumbled as though some inexorable Titan torch had seared and crumbled and broken it, left it now congealed like a wind-lashed sea, abruptly frozen into immobility. Moonlight upon earth so gently shines to make romantic a lover's smile. But the reality of the lunar night is cold beyond human rationality. Cold and darkly silent. Grim desolation. It was awesome and majestic. A frowning majesty that is even to the most intrepid human beholder inconceivably forbidding. And there were humans here now, on this tumbled plain between Archimedes and the mountains, one small crater amid the million of its fellows, distinguished this night by the presence of humans. The Grantline camp. It huddled in deepest puddle shadows. On the side of a bowl-like pit, a crudely circular orifice with a scant 2 miles across its rippling rim. There was a faint light here to mark the presence of the living intruders. The blue glow radiance of the Morel tube lights under a spread of glassite. The Grantline camp stood midway up one of the inner cliff walls of the little crater. The broken, rock-strewn floor, 2 miles wide, lay 500 feet beneath the camp. And behind it, the jagged, precipitous cliff rose another 500 to the heights of the upper rim. A broad, level shelf hung midway up the cliff, and upon it Grantline had built his little group of glassite dome shelters. Viewed from above, there was the darkly purple crater floor, the uplifting circular rim, where the earthlight tinged the spires and crags with yellow sheen, and on the shelf, like a huddled group of birds' nests. Grantline's domes hung and blazed down upon the inner valley. An intricate task to the building of these 3 glassite shelters. There were 3. A main one stood close to the brink of the bridge. A quadrangle of glassite walls, 100 feet in length by half as wide, and a scant 10 feet high to its flat-arched dome roof. Built for this purpose in Great New York, Grantline had bought his aluminite girders and braces and the glassite panels in sections. The air on the moon's surface was negligible, a scant 1/5000th of the atmospheric pressure at the sea level on Earth. But within the glassite shelter, a normal Earth pressure must be maintained. Rigidly braced double walls to withstand the explosive tremendancy with no external pressure to counteract it. A tremendous necessity for mechanical equipment had burdened Grantline's small ship to its capacity. The chemistry of manufactured air, the pressure equalizers, renewers, respirators, the lighting and temperature maintenance systems. Sorry, just grabbing some water. Anyway, the equalizers, renewers, respirators, the lighting and temperature maintenance systems, all the mechanics of a space flyer were here. And within the glassite double walls, there was necessity for a constant circulation of the air's temperature insulating system. There was this main Grantline building stretching low and rectangular along the front edge of the ledge. Within it were living rooms, a mess room, and a kitchen. 50 feet behind it, connected by a narrow passage of glassite, was a similar, though smaller, structure. The mechanical control rooms with their humming, vibrating mechanisms were here, and an instrument room with signaling apparatus, senders, receivers, mirror grids, autophones of several varieties, and an electro-telescope, small but modern, with dome overhead like a little Earth observatory. From this instrument building, beside the connecting pedestrian passage, wire cables for light and air tubes and strings and bundles of instrument wires ran to the main structure, gray snakes upon the porous gray lunar rock. The third building seemed a lean-to, banked against the cliff wall, a slanting shed wall, of glassite 50 feet high and 200 in length. Under it, for months, Grantline's borers had dug into the cliff. Braced tunnels were here, penetrating back and downward into this vein of radioactive rock. And the work was over now. The borers had been dismantled and packed away. At one end of the cliff, the mining equipment lay piled in a litter. There was a heap of discarded ore where Grantline had carted and dumped it after his first crude refining process yielded his waste. The ore slag lay like gray powder flake. The ore slag lay like gray powder flakes strewn down the cliff. Tracks and ore carts along the ledge stood discarded, mute evidence of the weeks and months of work of these helmeted miners that had undergone, struggling upon this airless, frowning world. But now all that was finished. The radioactive ore was sufficiently concentrated. It lay, this treasure, in a 70-foot pile behind the glassite lean-to, with a cage of wires over it and an insulation barrage guarding its gamma rays from escaping, to mark its presence. The ore shelter was dark, and the other two buildings were lighted, and there were small lights mounted at intervals about the camp and along the edge of the ledge. A spider ladder with tiny platforms some 20 feet above the other hung precariously to the cliff face. It descended the 500 feet to the crater floor, and behind the camp, it mounted to the jagged cliff face, to the upper right where a small observatory platform was placed. Such was the outer aspect of the Grantline treasure camp near the beginning of the lunar night, when unbeknown to Grantline and a score of men, the Planetara with its brigands was still approaching. The night was perhaps the sixth advanced. It was a full night, no breath of cloud to mar the brilliant starry heavens. The quadrant Earth hung poised like a giant yet mellow moon over Grantline's crater. A bright Earth, yet no air was here on the lunar surface to spread its light. Only a glow, mingling with the spots of blue tube light from the poles along the cliff and the radiance from the lighted buildings. The crater floor was dimly purple. Beyond the opposite upper rim from the camp height, the towering top of the distant Archimedes was visible. There was no evidence of movement showed about the silent camp. Then a pressure door in the end of the main building opened its tiny series of locks, and a bent figure came out. The lock closed and the figure straightened and gazed about the camp. Grotesque, bloated semblance of a man, helmeted with a rounded dome hood that suggested of an ancient sea diver, yet goggled and trunkled, like a gas-masked fighter of the 20th century war. He stopped presently and disconnected metal weights which were upon his shoes. And he stood erect again with giant strides, bounded along the cliff. Fantastic adventure in the blue gloom. A child's dream of crags and rocks and the strange lights with single monsters, figure in every 7-league boots. He went the length of the ledge with 20-foot strides, expected the lights, and made adjustments. He came back and climbed with agile, bounding leaps up the spider ladder to the dome on the crater top, and a light flash came up there. Then it was exhausted. The bloated, goggled figure came leaping down after a moment. Grantline's exterior watchman making his rounds. He came back to the main building and fastened the weights on his shoes and signed within. The lock opened and the figure went inside. It was early evening after the dinner hour and before the time of sleep, according to the camp routine Grantline was maintaining. 9 p.m. of Earth Eastern America time, recorded now upon his Earth chronometer. In the living room, the main building, Johnny Grantline sat with a dozen of his men dispersed about the home, whining away the best they had about their lonesome pairs. Old as usual, the cursed moon when I get home, if I ever do get home. Say what you say. Say what you say, Wilkes. But you'll spend your share of the gold leaf, and thanks to your constellations that you have your chance. Let him go. Come on, Wilkes, take a hand here. This game's no good with 3. The man who'd been outside flung his hissing helmet recklessly to the floor and unsealed his suit. Get me out of this. I won't play. I can't play your cursed game with nothing at stake. Commissioner's orders. A laugh went up at the sharp look Johnny Grantline flung from where he sat reading in a corner of the room. A laugh went up at the sharp Johnny Grantline. At the sharp look. Sorry, I already read that. Commander's orders. No gambling gold leafers tolerated here. Play the game, Wilkes. We all know it's infernal doing nothing. He's been struck by Earthlight. Commander, I told you to not let that guy play Wilkes out at night. A rough but good-natured lot of men, jolly and raucous. Ruckus? Jolly and ruckus by nature in their leisure hours. But there was too much leisure here now. Their mirth had a hollow sound. In older times, explorers of the frozen polar zones had to cope with inactivity, loneliness, and despair, but at least they were on their native world. The grimness of the moon was eating into the courage of Grantline's men. An unreality there, and unreality here. A weirdness, these fantastic crags, the deadly silent, the nights. Almost 2 weeks of Earth time in length, congealed by the deadly frigidity of space. The days of black sky, blaring stars, and flaming sun, with no atmosphere to diffuse the daylight. Days of the weird blending sheen of illumination, with most of the sun's heat radiating so swiftly from the naked lunar surface, the outer temperature was still cold. And day and night always the familiar beloved Earth disk, hanging poised up near the zenith, from the thinnest crescent to full Earth, and then steadily back to crescent, much like our own moon. Also abnormal, irrational, disturbing to human senses, with them whining work over an irritability grew upon Grantline's men. And perhaps since the human mind is so wonderful, an elusive thing, there lay upon these men an indefiable sense of impending disaster. Johnny Grantline felt it. He thought about it now as he sat in the room corner, watching Wilkes being forced into the Pelagic game, and he found it strong within him. Unreasonable, ominous depression, barring the accident which disabled his little spaceship when they reached this small crater hole. His expedition had gone well. His instruments and the information he'd had from the former explorers had picked up the ore vein within a scant month of search. The vein had now been exhausted, but the treasure was here. Nothing was left but to wait for the Planetara, and the men were talking of that now. Well, she ought to be well to midway from here to Farakshan by now. When do you figure she'll be back here and signal us?
20 days. Give her another 5 now to Mars and 5 in port. That's 10. We'll pick her signals in 3 weeks, mark me.
3 weeks? Give me 3 weeks of reasonable sunrise and sunset. This moon. You mean William's next daylight? He's inventing a lunar language. You'll be a moon man yet if you live here long enough. Olaf Swenson, the big blonde fellow from the Scandia fjords, came and flung himself down by Grantline. I think that... Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez. Oh, boy. This is some very 30s. I don't know. Maybe this is just like... This is going to come across as like a very stereotypical accent because that's how it's written. So, forgive me if this offends. I think they've been without not enough to do, Commander. If the Orius would not give out. 3 weeks, it isn't very long, Ollie. No, maybe not. From across the room, somebody said, "If the comet hadn't smashed on us, I'd ask the commander to let some of us take her back. The discarded equipment could go. Oh, shut up, Billy, she smashed. The little comet, cruising in search of the ore, had come to grief just as the ore was found. It lay now on the crater floor, with its nose bashed into an upflung spire. It lay now on the crater floor, with its nose bashed into an upflung spire of rock, and it was wrecked beyond repair. Save for the prearrangement with the Planetara, the Grantline party would have been helpless here on the moon. Knowledge of that, although no one ever expected but that the Planetara would come safely, served to add to the men's depression. They were cut off, virtually helpless on a strange world. Their signaling devices were inadequate to even reach Earth. Grantline's power batteries were running low, and he couldn't attempt wide-flung signals without jeopardizing the power necessary for the routine of his camp, and the evidence of the Planetara being delayed. Nor was his electrotelescope adequate to pick small objects at any great distance. Alright, so there's a couple of footnotes here. Let's read footnote F. Footnote F. The Gravelly storage tanks, the power used by the Grantline expedition, were heavy and bulky affairs. Economy of space on the Comet allowed but a few of them. And then, the electrotelescope. Electrotelescopes of most modern use and power were too large and used too much power to be available to Grantline. So that's probably why he doesn't have a That's why he doesn't have a telescope and all that. And his battery, he's got very small batteries just for size economy. Anyway, all of Grantline's efforts, in truth, had gone into the equipment for finding and gathering of the treasure. The safety of the expedition had to that extent been neglected, and Svensson was mentioning that now. You all agreed to it, Johnny said shortly. Every man here voted that above everything. What we wanted was to get the radium, wasn't it? A dynamic little fellow, this Johnny Grantline. Short of temper sometimes, but always just, and a perfect leader of men. In stature, he was almost small as Snap, rather. But he was thick-set, with a smooth-shaven, keen-eyed, square-jawed face, and a shock of brown tousled hair. A man of 35, though the decision of his manner, the quiet dominance of his voice, made him seem older. He stood up now and surveyed the blue-lit glassite room with its low ceiling close overhead. He was bow-legged. In movement he seemed to roll with a stiff-legged gait like some sea captain of days past, on the deck of his swaying ship. What a strange-looking figure he made. A heavy flannel shirt and trousers, boots heavily weighted, and bulky metal-loaded belt strapped about his waist. He grinned at Svensson. When we divide this treasure, everyone will be happy, Ollie. The treasure was estimated by Grantline to be the equivalent of 90 million in gold leaf, 110 millions in gross as it now stood, with 20 million to be deducted by the Federated refiners for reducing it to the standard purity of commercial radium. 90 million, with only $1.5 million to come off for expedition expenses, and the Planetara Company's share was another $1 million. A nice little stake. Grantline strode across the room with his rolling gait. Cheer up, boys. Who's winning here? I say, you fellows. However, an autophone buzzer interrupted him. A call from the dutyman in the instrument room of the nearby building. Grantline clicked the receiver, and the room fell into silence. Any call was unusual. Never did anything happen in here in the camp. The dutyman's voice sounded clear over the room. Signal's coming, not clear. Get over here, Commander. It was never Grantline's way to enforce needless discipline. It was never Grantline's way to enforce needless discipline. He offered no objection when every man in the camp rushed through the connecting passages. They crowded the instrument room where the tense dutyman stopped bending. No, he sat bending. Where the tense dutyman sat bending. I can't say it. Why can't I say it? They crowded the instrument room where the tense dutyman sat bending over his helio receivers, and the mirrors were swaying. The duty man looked up and met Grantline's gaze. I ran it up to the highest intensity, Commander. We ought to get it and not let it pass.
It was a low scale, Peter?
Yes, it's the weakest of infrareds. I'm bringing it up even though it uses too much of our power. The duty man was apologetic. Get the message. I had a swing a minute ago. I think it's the Planetara. Planetara? The crowding group of men chorused it. How could it be the Planetara? But it was. The call presently came in clear. It was unmistakably the Planetara, turned back now from a course to Farak Shan. How far away, Peter? The duty man consulted the needles of his dial scale. Close, I think. Very weak infrared, but it was close. 30,000 miles, maybe? It's Snapdean calling. The Planetara here within 30,000 miles. Excitement and pleasure swept the room. The Planetara is coming, had for so long been awaited eagerly. The excitement communicated to Grantline. It was unlike him to be incautious. The excitement communicated to Grantline. It was unlike him to be incautious, yet now with no thought save that some unforeseen and pleasing circumstance had brought the Planetara ahead of time, incautious Grantline certainly was. Raise the ore barrage. I'll go, my suit's here. A willing volunteer rushed out to the ore shed, and the gamma rays, which in the helio room of the Planetara came so unwelcome to Snap and I, were loosed. Can you send, Peter? Yes, with more power. Use it. Johnny dictated the message of his location, which we received. In his incautious excitement, he ignored the secret code, and an interval passed. The ore was occulted again. No message had come from us. Just Snap's routine signal in the weak infrared, which we hoped Grantline wouldn't get. The men crowding Grantline's instrument room waited in tense silence, and then Grantline tried the telescope. Its current weakened the lights with the drain upon the distributors and cooled the room with a sudden deadly chill as the Arent's insulating system slowed down. The duty men looked suddenly frightened. You bolt out our walls, Commander. The internal pressure won't chance it. They picked up the image of the Planetara, and it came from the telescope and shone clear on the grid, the segment of star field with a tiny cigar-shaped blob. It was clear enough to be unmistakable. The Planetara, here now over the moon, almost directly overhead, poised it with the altimeter scale, showed to be a fraction under 30,000 miles. The men gazed in awed silence, and the Planetara was coming. But the altimeter needle was motionless. The Planetara was hanging poised. A sudden gasp went around the room. The men stood with whitening faces, gazing at the Planetara's image, and the altimeter needle was once again moving. The Planetara was descending, but not with an orderly swoop. The image showed the ship clearly. The bow tilted up, then dipped down. But then in a moment it swung up again. The ship turned partly over and righted itself, then swayed again drunkenly. The watching men were stricken into horrified silence. The Planetara's image momentarily, horribly, grew larger, and it was swaying. And then it turned completely over, rotating slowly end over end. The Planetara was out of control, and it was falling. Now, before we come to Chapter 21, I'm going to take, actually I lied. We're going to read Chapter 21 first. And maybe Chapter 22 before we take a break. Ugh. I am a stretch, though. Ooh. Anyway, Chapter 21, The Wreck of the Planetara. On the Planetara in the helio room... Excuse me, sorry about that. On the Planetara in the helio room, Snap and I stood with Moa's weapon upon us, and Miko held Anita. He was triumphant and possessive. And then, as she struggled, a gentleness came to the strange Martian giant. Perhaps he really did love her. Looking back on it, I sometimes think so.
Anita, do not fear me.
He held her away from him.
I wouldn't harm you. I want your love.
Irony came to him.
And I thought I'd killed you, but it was only your brother.
He partly turned, and I was aware of how alert his attention was. And he grinned.
Hold them, Moa. Don't let them do anything foolish. So, Anita, you were masquerading to spy upon me? That was wrong of you.
He was again ironic, but Anita had not spoken. She held herself tensely away from Miko and flashed me a look. Just one. What horrible mischance to have caught this catastrophe. The completion of Grantline's message had come unnoticed by us all. Look, Grantline again! The mirrors were studying. We had no recording tape apparatus. The rest of the message was lost. The mirrors pulsed, then steadied, and yet no further message came. There was an interval while Miko waited. He held Anita in the hollow of his great arm.
Quiet, little bird. Do not fear me. I have work to do, Anita. This is our great adventure. We could be rich, you and I. All the luxuries 3 worlds can offer, all for us when this is over. Careful, Moa, this Haljan has no wit.
Well, he could say it. I, who had been witless, to let this come upon us. Moa's weapon prodded me, and her voice hissed at me with all the venom of a reptile enraged. So that was your game, Grey Haljan. I was so graceless to admit love for you. Snap murmured in my ear, Don't move, Greg, she's reckless. She heard it and whirled on him. We've lost George Prince, it seems. We'll survive without his ore knowledge. And you, Dean, and this Haljan. Mark me, I'll kill you both if you cause trouble.
Don't kill them yet, Moa. What was it Grantline said near the crater of Archimedes? Bring us down, Haljan will land.
He signaled the turret and gave Coniston the Grantline message. Nadia phoned it below to Han. The news spread about the ship, and the bandits were jubilant.
We'll land now, Haljan. Bring us down. Come, Anita. Anita and I will go with you to the turret.
To what destination am I bringing us down?
Near Archimedes, the Appian side. Keep well away from the Grantline camp. We'll probably sight it as we descend.
There was no trajectory needed. We were almost over Archimedes now. I could drop us with a visible instrumental course. But my mind was whirling with a confusion of thoughts. What could we do? What could we dare attempt to do when I met Snap's gaze? Bring us down, Greg. I nodded and pushed Moa's weapon away. You don't need that. I'll obey orders. We went to the turret, and Moa watched Snap and I, a grim, cold Amazon. She avoided looking at Anita, whom Miko helped down ladders with a strange mixture of courtier-like grace and amused irony. Coniston gazed at Anita with a falling jaw. I say, that's not George Prince, that's the girl.
No time for argument now. It's a girl masquerading as her brother. Get below, Coniston. Haljan takes us down.
The astounded Englishman continued gazing at Anita. I mean to say, where to on the moon? Not to encounter Grantline at once, Miko. Our equipment is not ready.
Of course not. We will land well away. He won't be suspicious. We can signal him after we land. We'll still have time to plan, to assemble the equipment. Get below. Get below. I told you.
The reluctant Coniston left us, and I took the controls. Miko, still holding Anita as though she were a child, sat beside me.
You will watch him, little Anita, a skilled fellow at this sort of work.
I rang my signals for the shifting of the gravity plates, and the answer should have come below, for the second or two, but it didn't, and so Miko regarded me with his great bushy eyebrows upraised.
Ring again, Haljan.
I duplicated, but yet there was no answer. The silence was frightening, ominous.
That cursed Han, ring again.
I sent the imperative emergency demand, and yet I found no answer. A second or two, then all of us in the turret were startled, transfixed. From below came a sudden hiss. It sounded in the turret. It came from the shifting room call grid. The hissing of the pneumatic valves of the plate shifters in the control room. The valves were opening, the plates automatically shifting into neutral and disconnecting. An instant of startled silence followed. Miko may have realized the significance of what had happened, and certainly Snap and I did. The hissing ceased. Wow. The hissing ceased. I gripped the emergency plate shifter switch which hung over my head, and its disc was dead. The plates were dead and neutral, in the only positions they were placed while only placed while in port. Their shifting mechanisms were imperative. Snap, we're in neutral! If you hadn't realized it before, was aware of it now. The moon disk moved visibly as the Planetara lurched. The vault of the heavens was slowly swinging.
Oh, Jean, what is this?
He stood up, holding Anita. But there was nothing he could do in this emergency. Oh, Jean, what? The heavens turned with a giant swoop, and the moon was over us. It swung in a dizzying arc, overhead, then back past our stern, under us, then appearing over our bow. The Planetara had turned over. It was upending, rotating, end over end. For a moment or two, I think all of us in that turret stood and clung. The moon disk, the earth, sun, and all the stars were swinging past our windows. So horribly dizzying. The Planetara seemed lurching and tumbling, but it was an optical effect only. I stared with grim determination at my feet. The turret seemed to steady. And then I looked again, that terrible swoop of all the heavens, and the moon as it went past seemed expanded. We were falling, out of control, with the moon gravity pulling us inexorably down. That cursed Han. Miko, stricken with his lack of knowledge of these controls, was wholly confused. I would really enjoy if the air conditioner stopped, flicking on and off. Yep, like that. That right there. It's just randomly flicking on and off. Can you not, though? Anyway. We're falling out of the sky. A moment only had passed. My fancy that the moon disk was enlarged was merely the horror of my imagination. We hadn't fallen nearly far enough for that. But we were falling, and unless I could do something, we'd crash upon the lunar surface. Anita was killed in the Planetara. She was killed in this Planetara turret. The end of everything for us. And so action came to me. Miko, you stay here. The controls are dead. Stay here. Hold Anita. I ignored Moa's weapon, which she was still clutching mechanically, and Snap thrust her away. Sit back, let us alone. We're falling, don't you understand? This deadly danger leveled us all. No longer were we captors and captured. Not brigands for this moment. No thought of Grantline's treasure. Trapped humans only. Leveled by the common instinct of self-preservation. Trapped here together. Fighting for our lives. Can you check us? What happened? I don't know. I'll try. I stood, clinging. This dizzying whirl. From the autophone grid, Constance's voice sounded. I say, Haljan, something's wrong. Han doesn't signal. The lookout in the forward tower was clinging to his window. Then on the deck below our turret, a member of the crew appeared, stood lurching for a moment, then shouted and turned and ran, swaying aimlessly. From the lower hall corridors, our grids sounded with the tamping of running steps. Panic among the crew was spreading over the ship, and a chaos had formed below decks. I pulled at the emergency switch again, and it was dead. But down below there were manual controls. Snap, we gotta get down there. The signals. Yeah. Constance's voice came like a scream from the end. Han is dead. The controls are broken and Han is dead. We barely heard him, and I shouted, Miko, hold Anita, or come on, Snap. We clung to the ladders, and Snap was behind me. Careful, Greg. The dizzying whirl. I tried not to look. The deck under me was now a blurred kaleidoscope of swinging patches of moonlight and shadow, and so we reached the deck and ran, swaying and lurching. It seemed that from the turret Anita's voice followed us. Be careful. Within the ship, our senses steadied. With the rotating, reeling heavens shut out, there were only shouts and tramping steps of the panic-stricken crew to mark that anything was amiss. That and a pseudo-sensing of lurching, caused by the pulsing of gravity. A pull when the moon was beneath our hull to combine its force with our magnetizers. A lightning when it was overhead. A throbbing, pendulum lurch. That was all. We ran down to the corridor incline. A white-faced member of the crew came running up. "What's happened? Aljan, what's happened? We're falling. Get below. Come with us." "Falling? Falling? My God! Whoa!" A steward came running. Snap swung at them. "Get ahead of us. The manual controls are our only chance. We need all you with the compressor punts." But it was an instinct to try to get on deck, as though here below we were rats caught in a trap. The men tore away from me and ran, and their shouts of panic resounded through the dim, blue-lit corridors. Coniston came lurching from the control room. "I say, falling? Aljan, my goodness, look at him." Han was sprawled at the gravity plate switchboard, sprawled head down. He was dead. Did he get killed by something, or was it something else? I bent over him, and his hands gripped the main switch. He'd ripped it loose, and his left hand had reached and broken the fragile line of tubes that intensified the current of the pneumatic plate shifters. Was his last frenzy determined to kill us all? And I saw that Han had been killed. It wasn't a suicide. In his hand he gripped a small segment of black fabric, a piece torn from an invisible cloak, perhaps? The questions were swept away by the necessity for action. Snap was rigging the hand compressors if he could get the pressure back in the tanks. "Are you armed?" "Yes," stammered Coniston. He was white-faced and confused, but not in a panic. He showed me his heat ray cylinder. "What do you want me to do?" "Round up all the crew. Get everyone you can. Bring them here to mend these pumps." He dashed away, and Snap shouted after him, "Kill them down if they argue." Miko's voice sounded from the turret call grid. "Falling." Miko, rather.
"Falling? Aljan, you can see it now. Check us."
I didn't answer that, and I pumped with Snap. Desperate moments, or was it an hour? Coniston brought the men, and he stood over them with a menacing weapon. We had all the pumps going, and the pressure rose a little in the tanks. Enough to shift a bow plate. I tried it. The plate just slowly clicked into a new combination. The gravity repulsion just in the bow tip. I signaled Miko. Have we stopped swinging?" "No, but
No, but slower."
I could feel it, that lurch of the gravity. But not steady now, a limp. The tendency of our bow was to stay up. "More pressure, Snap." "Yeah." We'll crash. We're caught in here." Coniston shot him. One of the crew rebelled and tried to bolt from the room. "We'll crash caught in here." But Coniston shot him down. I shifted another bow plate, then two in the stern. The stern plates seemed to move more readily than the others. "Run all the stern plates." I tried it, and the lurching stopped. Then Miko called.
"We're bow down, falling."
But we weren't falling free anymore. The moon gravity pull upon us was more than half neutralized. "I'll go up, Snap, and try the engines. You don't mind staying down and executing my signals?" "You idiot." He gripped my shoulders, and his eyes were gleaming, his face haggard, but his pale lips twitched with a smile.
"Maybe it's goodbye, Greg. We'll fall fighting."
"Yes, fighting. Coniston, keep the pressure up." With the broken set tubes, it took nearly all the pressure to maintain the few plates I'd shifted, and one shifted back to neutral. Where did I put my... There we go. Then the pumps gained on it, and it shifted again. I dashed up to the deck. The moon was so horribly close now. The deck shadows were still, though through the forward bow windows, the moon's surface was still glaring up at us. I reached the turret. The Planetara was steady. She was pitched bow down, half falling, half sliding like a rocket downward, and the scarred surface of the moon was spread wide under us. These last horrible minutes were a blur, and there was always Anita's face. She left Miko and faced with death she Faced with death, she sat clinging. Ignoring her, Moa too sat apart, staring, and Anita crept to me. Greg, this is the end. I tried the electronic engines from the stern, setting them in the reverse, and the streams of their light glowed from the stern forward along our hull and flared down from our bow toward the lunar surface. But no atmosphere was here to give resistance. Perhaps the electronic streams checked our fall just a little. Pumps gave us pressure in the last few minutes to slide a few of the hull plates, but our bow stayed down. We slid like a spent rocket falling. I recalled the horror of that expanding lunar surface. The maw of Archimedes yawning, a blob widening to a great pit, and I saw it to one side, rushing upward. A phantasmagoria of uprushing crags, black and gray, spires tinged with earthlight. Greg, goodbye. Her gentle arms were around me, and the end of everything for us had come. Not falling free, Anita. Some of our hull plates are set. My dial showed another plate shifting, checking us a little further. Good old snap. I calculated the next best plate to shift, and I tried it. Slid it over. Good old snap. Then everything faded, but the feeling of Anita's arms around me. The end of everything for us. There was an uprush of gray-black rock, and an impact. Chapter 22. The Hiss of Death. I opened my eyes to a dark blur of confusion. My shoulder hurt. There was a pain shooting through it. Something lay like a weight on me, and I couldn't seem to move my left arm. It was very strange. And then I moved it, and it hurt. I was lying, twisted, and I sat up. With a rush, memory came returning. The crash was over. I hadn't died. Anita, she was lying beside me. There was a little light here in the silent blur, a soft, mellow earthlight filtering in the window. The weight on me was Anita. She lay sprawled, her head and shoulders halfway across my lap. Not dead. Thank goodness, not dead. She moved. Her arms went around me, and I lifted her. The earthlight glowed on her pale face, but her eyes opened, and she faintly smiled. It's past, Anita. We've struck, and we're still alive. I held to her, as though all life's turgid danger were powerless to touch us. But in the silence, my floating senses were brought back to reality by a faint sound forcing itself upon me. A little hiss. The faintest murmuring breath like a hiss. Escaping air. I cast off her clinging arms. Anita, this is madness. For minutes we must have been lying there in the heaven of our embrace, but air was escaping. The Planetara's dome was broken or cracked, and our precious air was hissing out. Full reality came to me at last. I wasn't seriously injured. I found that I could move freely, I could stand. Sure, I had a twisted shoulder and a limp left arm, but they were better in a moment. And Anita didn't seem to be hurt. There was blood, but not her blood. Beside Anita, stretched face down on the turret grid, was the giant figure of Miko. The blood lay in a small pool against his face, and it was widening. Moa was here, and I thought her body twitched, and then she was still. The soundless wreckage. In the dim glow of the wrecked turret with its two motionless, broken human figures, it seemed as though Anita and I were ghouls prowling. I saw that the turret had fallen over to the Planetara's deck, and it lay dashed against the dome side. The deck was aslant, and there was a litter of wreckage. A broken human figure showed. One of the crew, who at last must have come running up. The forward observation tower was down in the chart room roof. In its metal tangle, I thought I could see the legs of the tower look out. So this was the end of the brigand's adventure. Planetara's last voyage. How small and futile are human struggles. Miko's daring enterprise, so villainous and human, brought all in a few moments to this silent tragedy. The Planetara had fallen 30,000 miles, but why? What had happened to Han, and where was Coniston down in this broken hull? And Snap. I thought suddenly of Snap. I clutched at my wandering wits. This inactivity was death. The escaping air hissed once more in my ears. Our precious air escaping away into the vacant desolation of the lunar emptiness. Through one of the twisted, slanting dome windows, a rocky spire was visible. The Planetara lay bow down, wedged in a jagged cradle of lunar rock. A miracle that the hull and dome had held together. Anita, we have to get out of here. I thought I was fully alert now, and I recalled that the brigands had spoken of partly assembling their moon equipment. If we could just find the suits and helmets. We have to get out. To Grand Line's camp. Their helmets are in the forward storage room, Greg. I saw them there. She was staring at the fallen Miko and Moa. She shuddered and turned away and gripped me. In the forward storage room by the port of the emergency lock exit. If only the exit locks would operate. We have to get out of here, but we have to find Snap first. Good old Snap. Would we find him lying dead? We climbed from the slanting, falling turret over the wreckage of the littered deck. It wasn't difficult. The lightness was upon us. Planetara's gravity magnetizers were dead, so we only had the light moon gravity pulling us. Careful, Anita. Don't jump too freely. We leapt upon the deck, and the hiss of the escaping pressure was a clanging gong of warning to tell us to hurry. The hiss of death was so close. Snap. Oh, Craig, I pray we find him alive and get out. We've got to rush it. Got to get out and find the Grand Line camp. But how far? Which way? I had to remember to take food and water. If the helmets were equipped with admission ports, if we could find Snap, if the exit locks would work to let us out. With a 15-foot leap, we cleared a pile of broken deck chairs, and a man lay groaning near them. I went back with a rush, but it wasn't Snap. It was just a steward. He'd been a brigand, but he was a steward to me now. Get up. This is all John. Hurry, we have to get out of here. The air is escaping. But he sank and he lay still. No time to find if I could help him. There were Anita and Snap to save. We'd found a broken entrance to one of the descending passages, and I flung the debris aside and cleared it. Like a giant of strength with only this moon gravity holding me, I raised a broken segment of the superstructure and heaved it back. Anita and I dropped ourselves down the sloping passage, and the interior of the wrecked ship was silent and dim. An occasional passage light was still burning. The passage and all the rooms lay askew. Wreckage everywhere, but the double dome and hull shell had withstood the shock. Then I realized that the Errant system was slowing down. Our heat, like our air, was escaping, radiating away, a deadly chill settling upon everything, and our walls were bulging. The silence and deadly chill of death would soon be here in these wrecked corridors. The end of the Planetara. I wondered vaguely if the walls would explode. And yet we continued to prowl like ghouls. We didn't see Coniston. Snap had been by the shifter pumps. We found him in the oval doorway. He lay sprawled. Was he dead? No, he moved. He sat up before we could get to him, and he seemed confused, but his senses clarified with the movement of our figures over him. Greg, why, Anita? Snap, you all right? We struck. The air is escaping. He pushed me away and tried to stand. Yeah, I'm all right. I was up a minute ago. Greg, it's getting cold. Where is she? I had a hitch. She wasn't killed. I spoke to her. Irrational. Snap. Snap, old fellow. He said normally, Easy, Greg. I'm all right now. Anita gripped him. Who? Snap. There she is. Another figure was here, on the grid floor by the door oval. A figure partly shrouded in a broken invisible cloak and hood. An invisible cloak. I saw a white face with opened eyes regarding me. The face of a girl, and it was Venza. You! Venza! Venza was here? Why? How? My thoughts swept away. Venza was here, dying. Her eyes closed, but she murmured to Anita, Where is he? I want him. Dying? I muttered impulsively. Here I am, Venza dear. Gently, as one would speak, with gentle sympathy to humor the dying. Here I am, Venza. But it was only the confusion of the shock upon her. It was upon us all. She pushed at Anita. I want him. She saw me and the whimsical Venus girl here even as we gathered, all of us blurred by the shock, confused in the dim, wrecked ship. With the chill of death coming, even here she couldn't make a jest, and her pale lips smiled. You, Greg. I'm not hurt. I don't think I'm hurt. She managed to get herself up on one elbow. Do you think I wanted you with my dying breath? Why, that conceit. Not you, handsome Jean. I was calling Snap. Golly, this girl's a tsundere, I guess. He was down to her. We're all right, Venza. It's over. We gotta get out of the ship. The air is escaping. We gathered in the oval doorway and fought a confusion of panic. The exit port's this way. I think so. The ship suddenly seemed a stranger to me, so cold, so vibrationless. There were broken lights and slanting, wrecked corridors everywhere. The ventilation fans had stilled, and the air was turning fetid. It was chilling and thinning, with escaping pressure rarefying so I could feel the grasp of it in my cheeks and the pinpricks into my burning lungs. We started off, 4 of us still alive in the silent ship of death. My blurred thoughts tried to cope with it all. Venza here, I recalled how she bade me create a diversion when the women passengers were landing on the asteroid. She'd carried out her purpose. In the confusion, she'd not gone ashore and stayed a stowaway here. She'd secured the cloak. Prowling to try and help us, she'd come upon Han, had seized his ray cylinder and struck him down, and been herself knocked unconscious by his dying lunge, which had also broken the tubes and wrecked the Planetara. And Venza, unconscious, had been lying here with the mechanism of her cloak still operating, so that we didn't see her when we came and found why Han didn't answer my signals. It's here, Greg. Snap and I lifted the pile of moon equipment. We located 4 suits and helmets, and the mechanisms to operate them. More in the chart room. But we didn't need any more. I robed Anita and showed her the mechanisms. Yes, I understand. Snap was helping Venza. We were all stiff from the cold, but within the suits and their pulsing currents, the blessed warmth came again. The helmets had admission ports through which food and drink could be taken, and I stood there with my helmet ready. Venza, Anita, and Snap were bloated and grotesque beside me. We'd found food and water here, assembled in portable cases, which the brigands had prepared, and Snap lifted them and signaled to me he was ready. My helmet shut out all sounds save my own breathing, my pounding heart, and the murmur of the mechanism. The blessed warmth and pure air were good. We reached the hull port locks, and they operated. We went through in the light of the headlamps over our foreheads. I closed the locks after us. An instinct to keep the air in the ship for other traps humans lying there. We slid down the sloping side of the Planetara, and we were unweighted, irrationally agile with a slight gravity. I fell a dozen feet and landed with barely a jar. We were out on the lunar surface, a great sloping ramp of crags. Stretched down before us in gray-black rock tinged with earthlight. The earth hung amid the stars in the blackness overhead like a huge section of a glowing yellow ball. This grim, desolate, silent landscape. Beyond the ramp, 50 feet below us, a tumbled, naked plain stretched away into blurred distance. But I could see mountains off there. Behind us, the towering, frowning rampart wall of Archimedes loomed against the sky, and I'd turned to look back at the Planetara. She lay broken, wedged between spires of an upstanding rock. A few of her lights still gleamed, but yet it was still the end of the Planetara. A three grotesque a figure. It's so. Oh man, sometimes I start talking and I think I'm funny. Anyway, the three grotesque figures of Anita, Venza, and Snap had started off. Strange, hunchback figures with the tanks mounted on their shoulders. I bounded and caught them and touched Snap when we made autophone contact. Which way do you think? I think this way, down the ramp. Away from Archimedes, toward the mountains. Shouldn't be too far. You run with Venza. I'll hold Anita. Keep together, Greg. We could soon run freely. Down the ramp, out over the tumbled plain. Bounding, grotesque, leaping strides. The girls were more agile and more skillful. They were soon leading us. The earth shadows of their figures leaped behind them, and the Planetara faded into the distance behind us. Archimedes stood back there, and ahead the mountains came closer. It was perhaps an hour. I lost count of time. Occasionally we stopped to rest. Were we going toward the Grantline camp? Would they see our tiny waving headlights? Another interval, and then far ahead of us on the ragged plain, lights showed, moving tiny spots of light, headlights on helmeted figures. And so we ran, monstrously leaping. A group of figures were off there. Was it Grantline's party? And Snap gripped me. Grantline, we're safe, Greg, safe. He took his bulb light from his helmet, and we stood in a group while he waved it, a semaphore signal. Grantline? And the answer came, yes, Eugene. Their personal code, no doubt of this. It was Grantline, who had seen the Planetara fall and had come to help us. I stood then with my hand holding Anita, and I whispered, it's Grantline. We're safe, Anita, my darling. Death had been so close. Those horrible last minutes on the Planetara had shocked us and marked us. We stood, trembling, and Grantline and his men came bounding up. A helmeted figure touched me, and I saw through the helmet pane the visage of a stern-faced, square-jawed youngest man. Grantline? Johnny Grantline? Yes, I'm Grantline. You're Hajan, Greg Hajan? They crowded around us and gripped us to hear our explanations. Brigands! It was amazing to Johnny Grantline. But the menace was over now, as soon as Grantline has realized its existence. As though the wreck of the Planetara was foreordained by an all-wise providence, the brigands' adventure had come to tragedy, and we stood for a time discussing it, and then I drew apart, leaving Snap with Grantline, and Anita joined me. I held her arm so we had autophone contact. Anita. Greg. Murmured nothings which mean so much to couples. As we stood in the fantastic gloom of the lunar desolation, with the blessed earth light on us, I sent up a prayer of thankfulness. Not that 100 millions of treasure were saved, not that the attack upon Grantline had been averted, but only that Anita was given back to me. In a moment of greater emotion, the human mind individualizes. To me, there was only Anita. Life is very strange. The gate to the shining garden of our love seemed swinging wide to let us in, and yet I recall that a vague fear still lay on me. A premonition. I felt a touch on my arm, and a bloated helmet visor was thrust near my own. I saw Snap's face peering at me. Grantline thinks we should return to the Planetara, might find some of them live. Grantline touched me. It's only humanity. Yes. We went back, and with some 10 of us, a line of grotesque figures bounding with slow, easy strides over the jagged rock-strewn plain. Our lights danced before us, and the Planetara came at last into view. My ship. Again that pang swept me as I saw her. This her last resting place. She lay there, in her open tomb, shattered, broken, unbreathing. The lights on her were extinguished. The Uranus system had ceased to pulse. The heart of the dying ship, for a while beating faintly, was now at rest. We left the 2 girls with some of Grantline's men at the admission port. Snap, Grantline, and I, with 3 others, went inside. There still seemed to be air, but not enough that we dared remove our helmets. It was dark inside the wrecked ship. The corridors were black, the hall control rooms were dimly illumined with earthlight straggling through the windows. This littered tomb, already cold and silent with death. With death. It's so deadly. Already cold and silent with death. We stumbled over a fallen figure, a member of the crew, and Grantline straightened from examining him. Yeah, he's dead. Earthlight fell on the horrible face, puffed flesh, bloated red from the blood which had oozed from its pores in the thinning air. I looked away, and we prowled further. Han lay dead in the pump room. The body of Coniston shouldn't have been near here, and we didn't see it. We climbed up the slanting, littered deck. The dome had not exploded, but the air up here had lost almost all of its charm. And so again Grantline touched me. That's the turret? Yes. No wonder, he asked. The wreckage was all so formless. We climbed up to snap into the broken turret room. We passed the body of that steward who had just at the end appeared to me and I had left dying. The legs of the forward lookout. The legs of the forward lookout still poked grotesquely up from the wreckage of the observatory tower, where it smashed down against the roof of the chart room. We shoved ourselves into the turret. What was this? There were no bodies here. Miko was gone. The pool of his blood lay congealed into a frozen dark splotch on the metal grid. And Moa was gone. They weren't dead. They'd dragged themselves out of here fighting desperately for life. We'd find them somewhere around here. But we didn't, and nor did we find Coniston. I recalled what Anita had said. Other suits and helmets had been here in the nearby chart room. The brigands had taken them, and food and water doubtless, and escaped from the ship, allowing us through the lower admission ports only a few minutes after we'd gone out. And so we made careful search of the entire ship. 8 of the bodies which should have been here were missing. Miko, Moa, Coniston, and 5 of the steward crew. We didn't find them outside. They were hiding near here, no doubt, more willing to take their chances than to yield now to us. But how in all this lunar desolation would we hope to locate them? No, let them go. If they want death, well, they deserve it, said Grantline. But we were saved. Then as I stood there, realization leapt at me. Saved? Were we not indeed fatuous fools? In all these emotion-swept moments since we'd encountered Grantline, memory of that brigand ship coming from Mars had never once occurred to snap her eye. I told Grantline now, and his eyes through the visor stared at me blankly. What? I told him again it'd be here in 8 days, fully manned in arms. But, Haljan, we have almost no weapons. All my Comet's space was taking up with mining equipment and the mechanisms for my camp. I can't signal Earth. I was depending on the Planetara. It surged upon us. The brigand menace passed. We were blindly congratulating ourselves on our safety, but it'd be 8 days or more before, in distant Ferrox Shan, the non-arrival of the Planetara would cause any real comment. No one was searching for us. No one was worried over us. No wonder the crafty Miko was willing to take his chances out here in the lunar wilds. His ship, his reinforcements, his weapons were coming rapidly. And we were helpless, almost unarmed, marooned here on the moon with our treasure. Anyway, and then we have all the Alright, now we have our next story, but before that, I'm going to take a real short break. I'm going to get up, do some stretches, get a little active. I would firmly suggest that you all do the same. And I will see you guys in just a few moments. Alright, so now we move to The Soul Snatcher by Tom Curry. Why can't I say shrill? immediately fail. The shrill voice of a woman stabbed the steady hum of the many machines in the great semi-darkened laboratory. It was the onslaught of weak femininity against the ebony shadow of Jared, the silent servant of Professor Ramsay Burr. Not many people were able to get the famous man against his wishes. Jared obeyed orders implicitly and was generally an efficient barrier. I'll see him, I will. I'll see him. I'm Miss Mary Baker, and it's his fault that my son's going to die. His fault, Professor Burr. Jared was unable to keep her quiet, and coming in from the sunlight, her eyes were not yet accustomed to the strange, subdued haze of the laboratory. An immense chamber crammed full of equipment, the vista of which seemed like an apartment in hell. Bizarre shapes stood out from the massive impedimenta, great stills which rose 2 full stories in height, dynamos, immense tubes of colored liquids, 100 puzzles to the inexpert eye. The small, plump figure of Miss Baker was very out of place in this setting. Her voice was poignant, reedy. A look at her made it evident that she was a conventional good woman. She had soft, cloudy golden eyes and a pathetic mouth, and she seemed on the point of tears. Ma'am, the doctor is busy, whispered Jared, endeavoring to shoo her out of the laboratory with his polite hands, and he was respectful yet firm. However, she refused to obey. She stopped when she was within a few feet of the activity in the lab, and stared with fear and horror at the center of the room, at its occupant, Professor Burr, whom she'd addressed during her flurried entrance. The professor's face, as he peered at her, seemed like a disembodied stare, or she could only see eyes behind a mask of lavender-gray glass eye holes, with flapping ends of dirty gray-white cloth. She drew in a deep breath and gasped, for the pungent fumes, acrid and penetrating, of sulfuric and nitric acid stabbed her lungs. It was like a breath of hell to fit the simile, and aptly Professor Burr seemed like the devil himself, manipulating the infernal machines. Acting swiftly, the tall figure stepped over and threw 2 switches in a single sweeping movement. The vermilion light, which had lived in a long row of tubes on a nearby bench, abruptly ceased to writhe like so many tongues of flame, and the embers of hell died out. Then the professor flooded the room in a harsh gray-green light, and stopped the high-pitched humming whine of his dynamos. A shadow picture, writhing on the wall, projected from a lead glass barrel, disappeared suddenly. The great color filters and other machines lost their semblance of horrible life, and a regretful sigh seemed to come from the metal creatures as they gave up the ghost. To the woman, it had been entering the abode of fear. She couldn't restrain her shudders. But she bravely confronted the tall figure of Professor Burr as he came forth to greet her. He was extremely tall and attenuated, with a red, bony mask of a face pointed at the chin by a sharp little goatee. Feathery blonde hair, silvered and awry, covered his great head. "Ma'am, your manner," said Burr in a gentle, disarmingly quiet voice. "Your manner of entrance might have cost you your life. Luckily, I was able to deflect the rays from your person, else you might not now be able to voice your complaint, for such seems your purpose in coming here, I presume." He turned to Jared, who was standing close by. "Very well, Jared, you may go. After this, it will be as well to throw the bolts, though in this case I'm quite willing to see the visitor." Jared slid away, leaving the little woman to confront the famous scientist, and for a moment Miss Baker stared into the pale gray eyes, the pupils of which seemed black as coal by contrast. Some, his bitter enemies, claimed that Professor Ramsay Burr looked cold and bleak as an iceberg, others that he had a baleful glare. His mouth was grim and determined. And yet, with her eyes, Miss Baker, looking at the professor's bony mask of a face with a high-bridged, intrepid nose, and passionless gray eyes, thought that Ramsay Burr would be handsome if a little less cadaverish and more human. The experiment which you ruined by your untimely entrance was not a safe one. His long white hand waved toward the bunched apparatus, but to her the room seemed all glittering metal coils of snake-like wire. Ruddy copper, dull lead, and tubes of all shapes. Hell cauldrons of unknown chemicals seethed and slowly bubbled, beetle-black bakelite fixtures reflecting the hideous light. "Oh, goodness!" she cried, clasping her hands as though she had addressed him in prayer. "Forget your science, Professor Byrne. Be a man. Help me. 3 days from now, my boy, my son, whom I love above all the world, is to die." 3 days is a long time. Do not lose hope. I have no intention of allowing your son, Alan Baker, to pay the price for a deed of mine. I freely confess it was I who was responsible for the death of, what was his name? Smith, I believe. It was you who made Alan get poor Mr. Smith to agree to the experience. No, wait, I lied. This is the lady talking. "It was you that made Alan get poor Mr. Smith to agree to the experiments which killed him, and which the world blamed on my son. They called it the deed of a scientific fiend, Professor Burr, and perhaps they're right, but Alan is innocent." "Be quiet. Remember, ma'am, your son, Alan, is only a commonplace medical man, and while I taught him a little from my vast store of knowledge, he was ignorant and of much less value to science and humanity than myself. Do you not understand? Can you not comprehend also that the man Smith was a martyr to science? He was no loss to mankind, and only sentimentalists could have blamed anyone for his death. I should have succeeded in the interchange of atoms which we were working on, and Smith would at this moment be hailed as the first man to travel through space in invisible form, projected on radio waves, had it not been for the fact that the alloy which conducts the 3 types of sinusoidal failed me and burned out. I admit it was an error in calculation, and Smith would now be called the Lindbergh or the atom butt for that. But yet Smith had not died in vain. I have finally corrected this error. Science is but trial and correction of error, you see, and all will be well." "But Alan must not die at all. For weeks he's been in the death's house. It's been killing me. The governor refuses to give him a pardon, nor will he commute my son's sentence. In 3 days he's to die in the electric chair for a crime in which you admit you alone are responsible for, and yet you remain in your lab, immersed in your experiments, and do nothing at all." The tears came now, and she sobbed hysterically. It seemed she was making an appeal to someone in whom she only had a forlorn hope. "Nothing? Nothing. Ma'am, I have done everything. I have, as I told you, perfected the experiment. It's successful. Your son has not suffered in vain, and Smith's name will go down with the rest of science's martyrs, as those who died for the sake of humanity. But if you wish to save your son, you must be calm. You must listen to what I have to say, and you must not fail to carry out my instructions to the letter. I am ready now." Light, the light of hope, sprang in the mother's eyes, and she grasped his arm and stared at him with a shining face through tear-dipped eyelashes. Do you mean it? Can you save him? After the governor's refused me, what can you do? No influence will snatch Alan from the jaws of the law. The public is greatly excited and very hostile toward him." A quiet smile played at the corner of Burr's thin lips. "Come, come, place this thin cloak about you. Alan wore it when he assisted me." The professor replaced his own mask and conducted the woman into the interior of the laboratory. "I'll show you now." And indeed he did, for she saw before her now, on long metal shelves, which appeared to be delicately poised on fine scales whose balance was registered by hairline indicators, 2 small metal cages. Professor Burr stepped over to a row of common cages set along the wall. There was a small menagerie there, guinea pigs, the martyrs of the animal kingdom, rabbits, monkeys, and some cats. The man of science reached in and dragged out a mewing cat, placing it in the right-hand cage on the strange table. He then obtained a small monkey and put this animal in the left-hand cage beside the cat. The cat on the right squatted on its haunches, mewing in pique, and looking up at its tormentor. The monkey, after a quick look around, began to investigate the upper reaches of its new cage. Over each of the animals was suspended a fine, curious metallic armament. For several minutes, while the woman, puzzled at how this demonstration was to affect the rescue of her condemned son, waited impatiently, the professor deftly working at the apparatus, connecting wires here and there. I'm ready now. Watch the two animals carefully. Yes, yes. The great scientist stooped over, looking at the balances of the indicators through microscopes. She saw him reach for his switches, and then a brusque order caused her to turn her eyes back to the animals, the cat in the right-hand cage and the monkey at the left. Both animals suddenly screamed in fear, and a sympathetic chorus sounded from the menagerie as a long purple spark danced from one gray metal pole to the other, over the cages on the table. At first, Miss Baker noticed no change. The spark had died. The professor's voice, unhurried and grave, broke the silence. The first part of the experiment is over. The ego. Oh, heavens, you've driven the poor creatures mad! She indicated the cat. That animal was clawing at the top bars of its cage, uttering a bizarre, chattering sound, somewhat like a monkey. The cat hung from the bars, swinging itself back and forth as on a trapeze, and then reached up and hung by its hind claws. And as for the monkey, it was squatting on the floor of its cage and made a strange sound in its throat, almost a mew, and hissed several times at the professor. They're not mad. As I was explaining to you, I've finished the first portion of the experiment. The ego, or personality if you prefer, of one animal has been taken out and put into the other. She was unable to speak. He'd mentioned madness. Was he, Professor Ramsay Burr, crazy? It was likely enough, yet the whole thing and these surroundings seemed plausible. As she hesitated about speaking, watching with fascinated eyes the out-of-character behavior of the two beasts, Burr went on. The second part follows at once. Now that the two bodies and egos have interchanged, or rather, now that the two egos have interchanged, I will shift the bodies. When it's completed, the monkey will have taken the place of the cat, and vice versa. Now watch. He busied himself for some time with his levers, and the smell of ozone reached Miss Baker's nostrils as she stared with horrified eyes at the animals. She blinked, and the sparks crackled madly, the monkey mewing and the cat chittering. Were her eyes going back on her? She could see neither animal distinctly. They seemed to be shaking in some cosmic disturbance and were but blurs. This illusion, for to her it seemed it must be optical, persisted and grew worse until the quaking forms of the two unfortunate creatures were like so much ectoplasm in swift motion, ghosts whirling about in a dark room. And yet she could see the cages quite distinctly, and the table and even the indicators of the scales. She closed her eyes for a moment, and the acrid odors penetrated to her lungs, and she coughed, opening her eyes. And yet now she could see clearly again. Yes, she could see a monkey, and it was climbing quite naturally about its cage. It was excited, but a monkey. And the cat, while protesting mightily, acted like a cat. Then she gasped. Had her mind and the excitement betrayed her? She looked at Professor Burr, and on his lean face there was a smile of triumph, and he seemed to be awaiting her applause. She looked again at the two cages. Surely at first the cat had been in the right-hand cage and the monkey in the left, and now the monkey was in the place where the cat had been, and the cat had been shifted to the left-hand cage. So it was with Smith when the alloys burned out. It's impossible to extract the ego or dissolve the atoms and translate them into radio waves, unless there's a connection with some other ego and body, for in such a case the translated soul and body would have no place to go. Luckily for you, madame, It was the man Smith who had been killed when the alloys failed me. It might have been Alan, for he was the second pole of the connection. But how can this mad experiment have anything to do with saving my boy? He waved impatiently at her evident denseness. Do you not understand? It is so that I will save Alan, your son. I shall first switch our egos, or souls, as you say, and then switch the bodies. It must always take this sequence. Why, I've not ascertained. But it always works thus. Miss Baker was terrified. What she'd just seen smacked of the blackest magic. And yet a woman in her position must grasp at straws. The world blamed her son for the murder of Smith, a man Professor Burr had made use of as he might use a guinea pig, and Alan must be snatched from the death house. Do you mean you can bring Alan from the prison here just by throwing those switches? That's it, but there's more to it than that. It's not magic, ma'am. It's science, you understand. And there must be some physical connection. With your help, that can easily be made, however. Professor Ramsay Burr, she knew, was the greatest electrical engineer the world had ever known, and he stood high as a physicist. Nothing hindered him in the pursuit of knowledge, they said. He knew no fear, and he lived on an intellectual promontory. He was so great that he almost lost sight of himself. To such a man, nothing was impossible. Hope, wild hope, sprang in Mary Baker's heart, and she grasped the bony hand of the professor and kissed it. Oh, I believe, you can do it. You can save Alan. I will do anything you tell me to. Very well. You visit your son daily at the death house, do you not? She nodded, and a shiver of remembrance of that dread spot passed through her. Then you will tell him the plan, and let him agree to see me the night preceding the electrocution. I'll give him final instructions as to the exchange of bodies. When my life, spirit, or ego is confined in your son's body in the death house, Alan will be able to perform the feat of changing the bodies, and your son's flesh will join his soul, which will have been temporarily inhabiting my own shell. Do you see? When they find me in the cell where they suppose your son to be, they will be unable to explain the phenomena and be able to do nothing but release me. Your son will go here and can be whisked away to a safe place of concealment. Yes, but what am I to do besides this? Professor Burr pulled out a drawer near at hand, and from it extracted a folded garment of thin, shiny material. This is a metal cloth coated with a new alloy, he said, in a matter-of-fact tone, and rummaged further, saying as he did so, I expected you would be here to see me, and I have been getting ready for your visit. All is prepared, save a few odds and ends, which I can easily clean up in the next 2 days. Here are 4 cups, which Alan must place under each leg of his bed, and this delicate little director coil you must take special pains with. It is to be slipped under your son's tongue at the time appointed. She was staring at him still, half in fear, half in wonder, but she couldn't feel any doubt of the man's miraculous powers. Somehow, while he talked to her and rested those cold eyes upon her, she was under the spell of the great scientist. Her son, before the trouble into which he'd been dragged by the professor, often hinted at the abilities of Ramsay Burr, giving her the idea that his employer was practically a necromancer, and yet a magician whose advanced scientific knowledge was correct and explainable in the light of reason. Yes, Alan had talked to her often when he was at home, resting from his labors with Professor Burr. He'd spoken of the new electricity discovered by the famous man, and also told his mother that Burr had found a method of separating atoms, and then transforming them into a form of radio electricity, so they could be sent in radio waves to designated points. And now she remembered the swift trial and the conviction of Alan on the charge of murder had occupied her so clearly she'd forgotten all else for the time being. That her son had informed her quite seriously that Professor Ramsay Burr would soon be able to transport human beings by radio. Neither of us will be injured in any way by the change. It's possible for me now to break up human flesh, send the atoms by radioelectricity, and reassemble them in the proper form by these special transformers and atom filters. Miss Baker took all the apparatus presented her by the professor and ventured the thought that it might be better to perform the experiment at once, instead of waiting until the last minute, but this Professor Burr waved aside as impossible. He needed the extra time, he said, and there was no hurry. She glanced about the room, and her eye took in the giant switches of copper with their black handles. There were others of a gray-green metal she didn't recognize. Many dials and meters, strange to her, confronted the little woman. These things, she felt with a rush of gratitude toward the inanimate objects, would help to save her son, so they interested her, and she began to feel kindly toward the great machines. Would Professor Burr be able to save Alan as he claimed? Yes, she thought, he could. She would make Alan consent to the trial of it, even though her son cursed the scientist and cried he'd never speak to Ramsay Burr again. She was escorted from the home of the professor by Jared, and going out into the bright sunlit street, blinked as her eyes adjusted themselves to daylight after this queer light of the laboratory. In a bundle, she had a strange suit in the cups. In her purse held a tiny coil, wrapped in cotton. How could she get the authorities to consent to her son having the suit? The cups and the coil she might slip to him herself. She decided that a mother would be allowed to give her son new underwear. Yes, she'd say it was that. Or I can just drop that, that's fine. She started at once for the prison. Professor Burr's laboratory was but 20 miles from the cell where her son was incarcerated. For those curious, on the audio only, that was me dropping a coin. Trying to flip a coin to look cool, and then I dropped it. As she rode on the train, seeing people in everyday attire, commonplace occurrences going on about her, the spell of Professor Burr faded, and cold reason stared her in the face. Was it nonsense, this idea of transporting bodies through the air in invisible waves? And yet she was old-fashioned. The age of miracles had not passed for her. Radio, in which pictures and voices could be sent on wireless waves, was unexplainable to her, perhaps. And yet she sighed and shook her head. It was hard to believe. It was also hard to believe that her son was in a deadly peril, condemned to death as a scientific fiend. Ooh, that didn't work. Here was her station. The taxi took her to the prison, and after a talk with the warden, finally she stood there, before the screen, through which she could talk to Alan, her son. Mother! Her heart lifted and melted within her. It was always thus when he spoke. Alan! They were allowed to talk undisturbed. Professor Burr wishes to help you. Her son, Alan Baker, M.D., turned eyes of misery upon her. His ruddy hair was awry. This young man was imaginative and could therefore suffer deeply. He had the gift of turning platitudes into puzzles, and his hazel eyes were lit with an elfin quality which, if possible, endeared him the more to his mother. All his life he'd been the greatest thing in the world to this woman. To see in him such straits tore her very heart. When he had been just a little boy, she'd been able to make joy appear in those eyes by a word and a pat, and now that he was a man, the matter was more difficult, but she'd always done her best. I cannot allow Professor Burr to do anything for me. It's his fault that I'm here, you see. Alan, you must listen. Listen carefully. Professor Burr can save you. He says it was all a mistake, that the alloy was wrong. He's not come forward before, because he knew that he'd be able to iron out the trouble if he had time, and thus snatch you from this terrible place. She put as much confidence into her voice as she could. She must, to enhearten her son. Anything to replace that look of suffering with one of hope. She'd believe. She did believe. The bars, the great masses of stone which enclosed her son, would be as nothing. he'd pass through them unseen, unheard. For a time, Alan spoke bitterly of Ramsay Burr, but his mother pled with him, telling him it was the only chance, and that the deviltry Alan suspected was imaginary. He killed Smith in such an experiment, and I took the blame. You know that. I really only followed his instructions. But you say he seems to have found a better alloy, the correct alloy? Yes, and this suit, you must put it on. But Professor Burr himself will be here to see you the day after tomorrow, the day preceding the... She trailed off and bit her lip, but managed to get out the dreaded word. The electrocution, but there won't be any of that sort of thing. No electrocutions for you, Alan. There cannot be. You'll be safe in my arms. She had to fight now to hold her belief in the miracle, which Burr had promised. The solid steel and stone dismayed her brain, and the new alloy seemed to interest Alan Baker. His mother told him of the exchange of the monkey and the cat, and he nodded excitedly, growing more and more restive, and his eyes began to shine with the hope of curiosity. I've told the warden about the suit, saying it was something I made for you myself. You must pretend the coil and the cups are things you desire for your own amusement. You know, since they've allowed you a great deal of latitude, since you're an educated man, you need diversions, of course. Yes, there may be some difficulty, but I'll sort it out. Tell Burr to come. I'll talk with him and he can instruct me in the final details. It's better than just waiting here like a rat in a trap. I've been afraid of going mad, Mother. This buoys me up. Thank you. He smiled at her, and her heart sang in the joy of relief. How did the intervening days pass? Miss Baker couldn't sleep. She could scarcely eat. She could do nothing but wait. She watched the meeting of her son and Ramsay Burr on the date preceding the date set for the execution. Well, Baker, how are you? You see how I am. Yes. Well, listen to what I have to say, and note it carefully, my young man. There must be no slip. You have the suit, the cups, and the director coil. You must keep the suit on. The cups go under the legs of the cot you lie on. The director under your tongue. The professor spoke further with Alan, instructing him in scientific terms which the women, there's more than one of her now. She accidentally duplicated herself. No. The professor spoke further with Alan, instructing him in scientific terms which the woman scarcely comprehended. Tonight, then, at 11:30. Be ready. Alan nodded, and Miss Baker accompanied Burr from the prison. You will let me be with you? It's hardly necessary. But I must see Alan the moment he's free. Make sure he's all right. Then I want to be able to take him away. I have a place in which we can hide, and as soon as he's rescued, he must be taken out of sight. Very well. It's immaterial to me, so long as you do not interfere with the course of the experiment. You must sit perfectly still. You must not speak until Alan stands before you and addresses you. Yes, I'll obey you. Miss Baker watched Professor Ramsay Burr eat his supper, and Burr himself was not in the least perturbed. It was wonderful, she thought, that he could be so calm. To her it was the great moment, the moment when her son would be saved from the jaws of death. Jared carried a comfortable chair into the laboratory, and she sat in it, quiet as a mouse, in one corner of the room. It was 9 o'clock, and Professor Burr was busy with his preparations. She knew he had been working steadily for the last few days. She gripped the arms of her chair, and her heart burned within her. The professor was making sure of his apparatus. He tested this bulb and that, and carefully inspected the curious oscillating platform, over which was suspended a thickly bunched group of gray-green wire, which seemed to be an antenna. The numerous indicators and implements seemed to be satisfactory, for at 11:15 Burr gave an exclamation of pleasure and nodded to himself. Burr seemed almost to have forgotten the woman. He spoke aloud occasionally, but not to her, as he drew forth a suit made of the same metal cloth as Alan must have on at this moment. The tension was terrific for the mother, who was awaiting the culmination of the experiment which would rescue her son from the electric chair. Or would it fail? What if Burr was mad? But she looked at him, and she was sure he was sane, as sane as she was. "He will succeed," she murmured, digging her nails into the palms of her hand. I know he will." She pushed aside the pictures of what would happen on the morrow, but a few hours distant, when Alan, her son, was due to be led to a legal death in the electric chair. Professor Burr placed the shiny suit upon his lank form, and she saw him put a duplicate coil, the same sort of small machine which Alan possessed, under his tongue. The Mephistophelian figure consulted a matter-of-fact watch, and at that moment Miss Baker heard, above the hum of the myriad machines in the laboratory, the slow chiming of a clock. It was the moment set for the deed. Then she feared the professor was insane, for he suddenly leapt to the high bench at the table, on which stood one of the oscillating platforms. Wires led out from this, and Burr sat gently upon it, a strange figure in the subdued light. Professor Burr, however, she soon saw, was far from insane. No, this was part of it. He was reaching for switches near at hand, and bulbs began to glow with unpleasant light. Needles on indicators swung madly, and at last Professor Burr kicked over a giant switch, which seemed to be the final movement. And for several seconds the professor didn't move, and his body grew rigid, and he twisted a few times. His face, though not drawn in pain, twitched galvanically, as though actuated by slight jabs of electricity. The many tubes flared up in pulsing waves of violet and pink. There were gray bars of invisibility, or areas of air, in which nothing visible showed. There came the faint, crackling hum of machinery, rather like a swarm of wasps in anger. Blue and gray thread of fire spat across the antenna. The odor of ozone came to Miss Baker's nostrils, and the acid odor burned her lungs. She was staring at him, staring at the professor's face. She half rose from her chair and uttered a little cry. The eyes had changed, and no longer were they cold and impersonal, the eyes of a man who prided himself on the fact that he kept his arteries soft and his heart hard. Instead, they were loving, soft eyes. "Alan!" Without a doubt, the eyes of her son were looking at her, out of the body of Ramsay Burr. "Mother, don't be alarmed. It's successful. I'm here, in Professor Burr's body." "Yes," she cried hysterically. It was too weird to believe. It seemed dim to her, unearthly. "Are you all right, darling?" "Yes. I felt nothing beyond a momentary giddy spell, a bit of nausea and mental stiffness. It was strange. I have a slight headache, but all is well." He grinned at her, laughed with a voice which was not his, yet which she recognized as directed by her son's spirit. The mirth was cracked, and unlike Alan's whole-hearted mirth, yet she smiled in sympathy. "Yes, the first part is a success. Our egos have interchanged. Soon our bodies will undergo the transformation, then I must keep under cover. I dislike Burr, but he's a great man. He saved me. I suppose the slight headache which I feel is one bequeathed me by Burr. I hope he inherits my shivers and terrors and the neuralgia for the time being, so he gets some idea of what I've undergone." He got down from the oscillating platform, the spirit of her son in Ramsay's body. "What are you doing now?" I must carry it out, the rest of it, myself. Burr directed me when we talked yesterday. It's more difficult when one subject is out of the laboratory, and the tubes must be checked. He went carefully about his work, and she saw him placing 4 of the tubes with others, new ones which were ready at hand. Though it was the body of Ramsay Burr, the movements were different from the slow, precise work of the professor, and more she realized that her son inhabited the devil before her. For a moment, the mother thought of attempting to dissuade her son from making the final change. Was it not better thus than to chance the disintegration of the bodies? Suppose something went wrong and the exchange didn't take place, and her son, that is, his spirit, went back to the death house. Midnight struck as he worked feverishly at the apparatus, the long face corrugated as he checked the dials and tubes. He worked swiftly, but evidently was following a procedure which he'd committed to memory, for he was forced to pause every so often to make sure of himself. "Everything's okay," said the strange voice at last, and he consulted his watch. 12:30. She bit her lip in terror as he cried, "Now!" and sprang to the table to take his place on the metallic platform, which oscillated to and fro under his weight. The delicate grayish metal antenna, which she knew would form a glittering halo of blue and gray threads of fire, rested quiescent over his head. "This is the last thing. I'll be myself in a few minutes, Mother," he said calmly, reaching for the big ebony-handled switch. "Yes, son." The switch connected, and Alan Baker, in the form of Ramsay Burr, suddenly cried out in pain. His mother leapt up to run to his side, but he waved her away. She stood, wringing her hands as he began to twist and turn as though torn by some invisible force. Eerie screams came from the throat of the man on the platform, and Miss Baker's cries of sympathy mingled with them. The mighty motors hummed in a high-pitched, unnatural whine, and suddenly Miss Baker saw the tortured face before her grow dim. The countenance of the professor seemed to melt. Then there came a dull, muffled thud, a burst of blue-white flame in the order of burning rubber, a tinkle of broken glass. Back to the face came the clarity of outline, and it still was Professor Ramsay Burr's body as she stared at it. Her son and the professor's shapes climbed from the platform and looked about him as though dazed. An acrid smoke filled the room, and burning insulation assailed the nostrils. Desperately, without looking at her, his lips set in a determined line, the man went hurriedly over the apparatus again. "Have I forgotten? Did I do anything wrong?" 2 tubes were burned out, and these he replaced as swiftly as possible. But he was forced to go over all the wiring and cut out whatever had been short-circuited, so that it could be hooked up anew with uninjured wire. And before he was ready to resume his seat on the platform, after half an hour of feverish haste, a knock came on the door. The person outside was imperative, and Miss Baker ran over and opened the portal. The whites of his eyes shining in the dim light, stood there. "The professor. Tell him that the warden wishes to talk with him. It's very important, ma'am." Wait, no, I gave him like a really flat voice, not the way they wrote it. "The professor. Tell him that the warden wishes to talk with him. It's very important, ma'am." The body of Burr, inhabited by Alan's soul, pushed by her, and he followed The body of Burr, inhabited by Alan's soul, pushed by her, and she followed falteringly, wringing her hands. She saw the tall figure snatch at the receiver and listen. Oh, God. At last he put the receiver down on the hook, automatically, and sank into a chair, his face in his hands. Miss Baker went to him quickly. "What is it, Alan?" "Mother, it was the warden of the prison. He told me Alan Baker had gone temporarily insane and claimed to be Professor Ramsay Burr in my body." "But what's the matter? Can't you finish the experiment, Alan? Can't you exchange the 2 bodies now?" "Mother, they electrocuted Ramsay Burr in my body at 12:45 tonight." She screamed. She was faint, but she controlled herself with great effort. "But the electrocution wasn't to be until tomorrow morning." "They were allowed a certain latitude, about 12 hours. Burr protested up to the last moment and begged for time. Then they must have come for him and dragged him forth to die in the electric chair while you were..." Then they must have come forth for him and dragged him to die in the electric chair while you were attempting the second part of the change." "Yes, that's why it failed. That's why those tubes and wires burned out, why we couldn't exchange bodies. It began to succeed, and then I could feel something terrible had happened. It was impossible to complete the beta circuit, which short-circuited. It took him from the cell, you see, while I was starting the exchange of the atoms." For a time, the mother and her boy sat staring at one another, and she saw the tall, eccentric figure of Ramsay Burr before her, yet she also saw the soul of her son within that form. The eyes were Ellen's, the voice was soft and loving, and his spirit was with her. "Come, Ellen, my son." Burr paid the price. He became a martyr to science. The world wondered why Professor Ramsay Burr, so much in the headlines as a great scientist, suddenly gave up all his experiments and took up the practice of medicine. Now the public furor and indignation over the death of the man Smith has died down. Sentimentalists believe that Ramsay Burr has reformed and changed his icy nature, for he manifests great affection and care for Miss Mary Baker, the mother of the electrocuted man who had been his assistant. Oh my goodness, we have another. Okay, there's an opening installment of a 4-part novel called Murder Madness in the next issue. Thank Hylia, that's not this one. Oh. And allow me just a moment to grab some more water, and then we'll start in on The Ray of Madness by Captain S.P. Meek. Of course I have the hiccups. Why would I ever not have the hiccups? It's fine. Now, as I recall, don't quote me on this, because I might be wrong, but as I recall, S.P. Meek was the one who had been writing the FBI agent and the scientist stories, correct? And we are learning about our character is Dr. Bird, so perhaps we've returned to that storyline with those recurring characters. I certainly wouldn't mind that. They were interesting characters. Anyway, a knock sounded at the door of Dr. Bird's private laboratory in the Bureau of Standards. The famous scientist paid no attention to the interruption, but bent his head lower over the spectroscope with which he was working. The knock was repeated with a quality of quiet insistence upon recognition. The doctor smothered an exclamation of impatience and strode over to the door and threw it open to the doctor. Knocked her. Yes. Knocked her. The doctor smothered an exclamation of impatience and strode over to the door, throwing it open to the knocker. "Oh, hello, Carnes," he exclaimed as he recognized his visitor. "Come in and sit down. Keep your mouth shut for a few minutes. I'm busy just now, but I'll be at liberty in a little while."
"There's no hurry, Doctor,"
replied Operative Carnes of the United States Secret Service, as he entered the room and sat upon the edge of the doctor's desk.
"I haven't got a chase up my sleeve this time. I just came in for a little chat."
"All right, then. Glad to see you. Read that latest volume of the Zeitschrift for a while. That article of Von Bayer's got me guessing all right." Carnes picked up the indicated volume and settled himself to read. The doctor once again bent over his apparatus, and time again, he made minute adjustments and gave vent to muttered exclamations of annoyance at the results he obtained. Half an hour later, he rose from his chair with a sigh and returned to his visitor. "What do you think of Von Bayer's alleged discovery?"
"It's all too deep for me, Doctor. All I can make out of it is that he claims to have discovered a new element called Loonium, but hasn't been able to isolate it yet. Is there anything remarkable about that? It seems I've read of other new elements being discovered from time to time."
"Well, there's nothing remarkable about the discovery of a new element by the spectroscopic method. We know from Mendeleev's table that there are a number of elements which we have not discovered as yet, and yet several of the ones we know were first detected by the spectroscope. The thing which puzzles me is that so brilliant a man as Von Bayer claims to have discovered it in the spectra of the moon. His name Loonium is taken from Luna, the moon, you know."
"Why not the moon? Haven't several elements
It's been first discovered in the spectra of stars." Certainly. The classic example is Lockyer's discovery of an orange line in the spectra of the Sun in 1868. No known terrestrial element. Hang on a moment. Anyway, sorry about that. As I said to the actual stream rather than the recording a moment ago, that was just my roommate. He didn't know I was recording, so he came in. And he made it relatively quick. Anyway, let's return to our story. Certainly. The classic example is Lockyer's discovery of an orange line in the spectra of the Sun in 1868. No known terrestrial element gave such a line, and he named the new element which he deduced helium from Helos, the Sun. The element helium was first isolated. The element helium was first isolated by Ramsay some 27 years later. So other elements have been found in the spectra of stars, but the point I'm making is that the Sun and the stars are incandescent bodies, and could be logically expected to show the characteristic lines of their constituent elements in their spectra. But the Moon is a cold body without atmosphere, and is visible only by reflected light. The element Loony may exist in the Moon, but the manifestations which von Baer has observed must be not from the Moon, but from the source of the reflected light which he spectra-analyzed.
You're way over my depth, Doctor.
I'm over my own. I've tried to follow von Breyer's reasoning. I've even tried to check his findings. Twice this evening I thought that I caught a momentary glimpse on the screen of my fluoroscope of the ultraviolet line which he reports as characteristic of lunium, but I'm not certain. I haven't been able to photograph it yet. He notes in his article that the line seems to be quite impermanent, fades so rapidly that an accurate measurement of its wavelength is almost impossible. However, let's drop that subject. How do you like your new assignment?
It's all right. I'd rather be back on my old work.
I haven't seen you since you were assigned to the presidential detail. I suppose that you fellows are pretty busy getting ready for Premier McDougal's visit.
I doubt if he'll come. Things are not exactly propitious for a visit of that sort just now.
Question of the day, what's perpetuitous mean? What is this IPA? Propitious. Okay, yes, I suppose that's how you say that. Okay, it's actually propitious. Anyway, giving or indicating a good chance of success. See note at timely. Special uses archaically meaning favorably. Okay, it's a good word. Dr. Bird sat back in his chair in surprise. I thought the whole thing was arranged. The press seems to think so at any rate.
Everything's arranged, but arrangements may be cancelled. I wouldn't be surprised to hear that they were.
Cons, you've either said too much or too little. There's something more than this to appear There's something more to this than appears on the surface. If it's none of my business, don't hesitate to tell me. And I'll forget what you've said, but if I can help you, speak up. Carnes puffed meditatively at a pipe for a few minutes before replying.
It's really none of your business, Doctor, and yet I know that a corpse is a chatterbox compared to you when you're told anything in confidence, and I really need to unload my mind. It's been kept from the press so far, but I don't know how long it can be kept muzzled. In strict confidence, the President of the United States acts as though he was crazy.
Quite a section of the press has claimed that for a long time, replied Dr. Bird with a twinkle in his eye.
I don't mean crazy in that way, Doctor. I mean really crazy. Bugs, nuts, bats in the belfry, however you want to say it.
Dr. Bird whistled softly, which I'll save your ears from because my microphone doesn't like it when I whistle. Are you sure, Carnes?
As sure as may be. Both of his physicians think so. They were non-committal for a while, especially as the first attack waned and he seemed to recover, but then the second attack came on more violently than the first, and the president began to act strangely. They had to take the presidential detail into their confidence. He's been quietly examined by some of the greatest psychiatrists in the country, but none of them have ventured on a positive verdict as to the nature of the malady. The malady, rather. They admit, of course, that it exists, but they won't classify it. The fact that it's intermittent seemed to have them stopped. He was bad a month ago, but he recovered and became, to all appearances, normal for a time. About a week ago, he began to show strange symptoms again, and now he's getting worse daily. If he goes on getting worse for another week, it'll have to be announced so that the vice president can take over the duties to the head of the government.
What are the symptoms?
The first thing we noticed was a failing of his memory. Coupled with this was restlessness and a habit of nocturnal prowling. He tosses continually on his bed and mutters, and at times leaps up and rages back and forth in his bedchamber, howling and raging. Then he'll calm down and compose himself and go to sleep, only to wake in half an hour and go through the same performance. It's pretty ghastly for the men on night guard.
How does he act in the daytime?
Heavy and lethargic. His memory becomes a complete blank at times, and he talks wildly. Remind you of anyone? Those are the times we must guard against.
Could this be overwork?
Not according to his physicians. His physical health is splendid and his appetite unusually keen. He takes his exercise regularly and suffers no ill health except perhaps a little eye trouble.
Dr. Bird leapt to his feet. Tell me more about this eye trouble, Carnes.
I don't know about much of it, Doctor. Admiral Clay told me it was nothing but a mild ophthalmia, which should yield readily to treatment. That was when he told me to see that the shades of the president's study were partially drawn to keep the direct sunlight out.
Beg pardon? What's ophthalmia? Ophthalmia, no definition found. That means we gotta go to Google. What is ophthalmia? Ophthalmia? Ophthalmia, inflammation of the eye, especially ophthalmia. Okay, I am saying it right. It's ophthalmia. At least that's what the IPA says. Ophthalmia. It's a good word. Inflammation of the eye, especially conjunctivitis. So his eyes are all red, and he can't sleep. Has he been getting into the drugs? Ophthalmia be sugared. What do his eyes look like?
Well, they're rather red and swollen, a little bloodshot. He has a tendency to shut them when he's talking, and he avoids light as much as possible. I hadn't noticed anything peculiar about it.
Carnes, did you ever see a case of snow blindness? The operative looked up in surprise.
Yes, I have. I had it myself once in Maine. Now that you mention it, his case does look like snow blindness, but that's absurd in Washington in August.
Dr. Bird rummaged in his desk and drew out a book, which he consulted for a moment. Now, Carnes, I want some dates from you, and I want them accurately. Don't guess, for a great deal may depend on your accuracy in your answers. When was this mental disability on the part of the president first noticed? Carnes drew a pocket diary from his coat and consulted it.
The 17th of July. That is, we're sure, in view of later developments, that was the date it first came on. We didn't realize anything was wrong until the 20th. The night of the 19th, the president slept very poorly, getting up and creating a disturbance twice, and on the 20th he acted so strangely it was necessary to cancel 3 conferences. Dr. Bird checked off the dates on the book before him and nodded.
Go on and describe the progress of the malady by days.
It got progressively worse until the night of the 23rd. The 24th he was no worse, and on the 25th a slight improvement was noticed. He got steadily better until by the 3rd or 4th of August he was apparently normal. About the 12th he began to show signs of restlessness which have increased daily during the past week. Last night, the 19th, he slept only a few minutes, and Brady, who was on guard, says that his howls were terrible. His memory has been almost a total blank today, and all of his appointments were cancelled ostensibly because of his eye trouble. If he gets any worse, it'll probably be necessary to inform the country as to his true condition. When Carnes had finished, Dr. Bird sat for a time in concentrated thought.
You did exactly right in coming to me, Carnes. I don't think this is a job for a doctor at all. I believe it needs a physicist and perhaps a chemist and, I suppose a detective to cure him. We'll get busy.
What do you mean, Doctor? You think some exterior
Force is causing the president's disability? I think nothing, Carnes, but I do intend to know something before I am through. Don't ask for explanations. It's not the time for talk. It's the time for actions. Can you get me into the White House tonight?
I doubt it, Doctor, but I'll try. What excuse should I give? I'm not supposed to have told you anything about the president's illness.
Get Bolton, your chief, on the phone and tell him you've talked to me when you shouldn't have. He'll blow up, but after he's through exploding, tell them that I smell a rat and I want him down here at once with carte blanche authority to do as I see fit in the White House. If he makes any fuss about it, if he makes any fuss about it, remind him of the fact that he's considered me crazy several times in the past when events showed that I was right. If he won't play after that, let me talk to him.
All right, Doctor,
replied Carnes as he picked up the scientist's telephone and gave him the number of the home of the chief of the Secret Service.
I'll try to pull him out of it. He's got a good deal of confidence in your ability.
Half an hour later, the door of Dr. Bird's laboratory opened suddenly to admit Bolton. Doctor. Wait, no. We're gonna give this guy this voice.
Doctor, what the dickens have you got on your mind now? I understand Carnes the line for talking out of turn, but if you really have an idea, I suppose I'll forgive him. What do you suspect?
I suspect several things, Bolton, but I haven't the time to tell you what they are. I want to get quietly into the White House as promptly as possible.
That's easy, but first I want to know what the object of the visit is.
The object is to see what I can find out. My ideas are entirely too nebulous to attempt to lay them out before you just now. You've never worked directly with me on a case before, but Carnes can tell you. I have my own methods of working. I won't spill my ideas until I have something more definite to go on than I have at present.
Doc's right, Chief. He has an idea, all right, but wild horses won't drag it out of him until he's ready to talk. You have to take him on faith, as I always do.
Bolton hesitated a moment, then shrugged his shoulders.
Whatever's your way, Doctor. Your reputation, both as a scientist and as an untravelable, tangled skein, is too good for me to boggle about your methods. Tell me what you want, and I'll try to get it.
I want to get into the White House without undue prominence being given to my movements, and sit outside the president's door for a short time. Later, I will want to examine his sleeping quarters carefully and to make a few tests. I may be entirely wrong in my assumptions, but I believe there is something there that requires my attention.
Come along, I'll get you in and let you listen. But the rest you'll have to trust your luck on. You may have to wait until morning.
We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I'll get a little stuff together that we may need. In a few moments, he'd packed up some apparatus in a bag, and taking up it in an instrument case, he followed Bolton and Carnes down the stairs and out on the grounds of the Bureau of Standards. It's a beautiful moon, isn't it? Carnes assented absently to the doctor's remark, but Bolton paid no attention to the luminous disk overhead, which was flooding the landscape with its mellow light.
My car is waiting.
All right, old man, but stop for a moment and admire this moon. Have you ever seen a finer one?
Come on and let the moon alone.
My dear man, I absolutely refuse to move a step until you pause in your headlong devotion to your duty and pay homage due to Lady Luna. Don't you realize, you benighted Christian, that you're gazing upon what has been held to be a deity, or at least a visible manifestation of a deity, for ages immemorial? Haven't you ever had time to study the history of the moon-worshipping cults? They're old as mankind, you know. The worship of Isis was really only an exalted type of moon worship. The crescent moon, you may remember, was one of her most sacred emblems. Bolton paused and looked at the doctor suspiciously.
What are you doing? Pulling my leg?
Not at all, my dear fellow. Carnes, doesn't the sight of the glowing orb of night influence you to pious meditation upon the frailty of human life, and the insignificance of human ambition?
Not to any very great degree.
Carnsey, old dear, I fear that you are a crass materialist. I'm beginning to despair of ever inculcating you any respect for the finer and subtler things of life. I must try Bolton. Bolton, have you ever seen a finer moon? Remember, I won't move a step until you've carefully considered the matter and fully answered my question. Bolton looked first at the doctor and then at Carnes, and then finally looked very reluctantly at the moon.
It's a fine one, but all full moons look large on clear nights at this time of year.
Then you have studied the moon, I was sure. He broke off his speech suddenly and listened. From a distance came the mournful howl of a dog. It was answered in a moment by another howl from a different direction. Dog after dog after dog took up the chorus until the air was filled with the melancholy wailing of the animals. See, Bolton, even the dogs feel the chastening influence of the lady of the night, and repent of their sins of their youth, the follies of their manhood. Or should one say doghood? Come along, I feel that the call of duty must tear us away from the contemplation of the beauties of nature, unfortunately. He led the way to Bolton's car and got in without further word. A half hour later, Bolton led the way to the White House, and a word to the Secret Service operative on guard at the door admitted him and his party, and he led the way to the newly constructed solarium where the president slept. An operative stood outside the door.
What word, Brady?
He seems worse, sir. I doubt if he slept at all. Admiral Clay's been in there several times, but he didn't do much good. There, listen, the president's getting up again. From behind the closed door which confronted them came sounds of a person rising from a bed and pacing the floor, slowly at first, and then more and more rapidly until it was almost a run. A series of groans came to the watchers, and then a long drawn-out howl. And to this Bolton shuddered. And to this Bolton shuddered. Poor devil. Dr. Bird shot a quick glance around. Where's Admiral Clay?
He's pretty big at best, should I call him?
No, take me to his room. The president's naval physician opened the door in response to Bolton's knock. Is he worse?
I don't think so, Admiral. I wanted to introduce you to Dr. Bird of the Bureau of Standards. He wants to talk to you about the case.
I'm honored, Doctor, said the physician as he grasped the scientist's outstretched hand. Come in. Pardon my appearance, but I was startled out of a doze when you knocked. Have a chair. Tell me how I can serve you. Dr. Bird drew a notebook from his pocket. Dr. Bird drew a notebook from his pocket. I've received certain dates in connection with the president's malady from Operative Carnes, and I wish you to verify them. Pardon me a moment, Doctor, but may I ask what your connection is with the matter? I was not aware that you were a physician or a surgeon.
Dr. Bird is here by the authority of the Secret Service. He has no connection with the medical treatment of the president, but permit me to remind you that the Secret Service is responsible for the safety of the president, and so have a right to demand such details about him as are necessary for his proper protection.
I have no intention in obstructing you in the proper performance of your duties, Dr. Bolton. Pardon me, Admiral. It seems to me that we are getting started on the wrong foot. I suspect that certain exterior forces are more or less concerned in this case, and I've communicated my suspicions to Mr. Bolton, rather. He in turn brought me here in order to request from you your cooperation in the matter. We have no idea of demanding anything, nor really seeking help, which we believe that you can give us.
Pardon me, Admiral, I had no intention of angering you.
I am at your service, gentlemen. What information did you wish, Doctor? At first, merely a verification of the history of the case as I have it. Dr. Bird read the notes he'd taken down from Carnes, and then Dr. Bird read the notes he'd taken down from Carnes, and the Admiral nodded agreement. Those dates are correct. Now, Admiral, there are two further points on which I wish enlightenment. The first is the ophthalmia, which is troubling the patient. It's nothing to be alarmed at as far as symptoms go, Doctor. It's a rather minor case of irritation, somewhat analogous to glaucoma, but rather stubborn. He had an attack several weeks ago, and while it didn't yield the treatment as readily as I'd wished, that is to say, it cleared up nicely in a couple of weeks, and I was quite surprised at this recurrent attack. His sight is in no danger, if that's your worry. Have you tried to connect this ophthalmia with his mental aberrations? Why, no, Doctor, there's no connection. Are you sure? I'm certain. The slight pain which his eyes give him could never have such an effect on the mind of so able and energetic a man as he is. Well, I suppose we'll let that pass for the moment. The other question is this: has he had any form of skin trouble? The Admiral looked up in surprise. Yes, he has. I had mentioned it to no one, for it really amounts to nothing, but he has a slight attack of some obscure form of dermatitis, which I'm treating. It's affecting, so it seems, only his face and hands. Please describe it. It's taken the form of a brown pigmentation on his hands. On the face, it causes a slight itching and subsequent peeling of the affected areas. In other words, it's acting like a sunburn. Yes, somewhat, actually. It's not that, however. He's been exposed to the sun so little lately, on account of his eyes, you see. I notice he's sleeping in the new solarium which was added last winter to the executive mansion. Can you tell me with what type of glass it is equipped? Yes, it was not equipped with glass at all, but with fused quartz. And when did he start to sleep there? As soon as it was completed. And all the time the windows would have been of fused quartz? No, they were glazed at first, but the glass was removed and the fused quartz substituted at my suggestion about 2 months ago, just before this trouble started. Thank you, Admiral. You've given me several things to think about. My ideas are still a bit too nebulous to share as of yet, but I think that I can give you one piece of very sound advice. The President is spending a very restless night. If you would remove him from the solarium and get him to lie down in a room which is glazed with ordinary glass and pull down the shades so that he'll be in the dark, I think that he'll pass a much better night. Admiral Clay looked keenly into the piercing black eyes of the doctor. I know something of your reputation, Bird, and I'll follow your advice, if you will tell me why you make this particular suggestion. So that I can work in the solarium tonight without interruption. I have some tests I wish to carry out while it's still dark. If my results are negative, forget what I've told you. If they yield any information, I'll be glad to share it with you at the proper time. Now get the President out of that solarium and tell me when the coast is clear. The Admiral donned a dressing gown and stepped out of the room, returning after 15 minutes. The solarium's at your disposal, Doctor. Shall I accompany you? If you wish, assented Dr. Bird as he picked up his apparatus and strode out of the room. In the solarium, he glanced quickly around, noting the position of each of the articles of furniture. I presume the President always sleeps with his head in this direction, he remarked, pointing to the pillow on the disturbed bed, and the Admiral nodded assent. Dr. Bird opened the bag which he had packed in his laboratory, took out sheet of cardboard covered with a metallic-looking substance, and placed it on the pillow. He stepped back and donned a pair of smoked glasses, watching it intently. Without a word, he took off the glasses and handed them to the Admiral. The Admiral donned them and looked at the pillow. As he did so, an exclamation broke from his lips. That plate seems to glow, he said in an astonished voice. Dr. Bird stepped forward and laid his hand on the pillow. He was wearing a wristwatch with a radiolite dial. The substance suddenly increased its luminescence and began to glow fiercely, long, luminous streamers seeming to come from the dial. The doctor took his hand away and substituted a bottle of liquid for the plate on the pillow. Immediately, the bottle began to glow with a phosphorescent light.
What on earth is it?
An excitation of a radioactive fluid. The question is what's exciting it? Somebody get a stepladder. While Bolton had gone after the ladder, the doctor took from his bag what looked like an ordinary pane of glass. Take this, Cons, and start holding it over those panes of quartz, which you can reach. Stop when I tell you to. The operative held the glass over each of the panes in succession, but the doctor, who kept his eyes covered with the smoked glasses and fastened on the plate, which he had replaced on the pillow, said nothing. When Bolton arrived at the ladder, the process went on. One end and most of the front of the solarium had been covered, before an exclamation from the doctor halted the work. That's the one. Hold the glass there for a moment. Hurriedly, he removed the plate from the pillow and replaced the phial of liquid, and there was only a very feeble glow. Good enough. Take away the glass, but mark that pane and be ready to replace it when I give the word. From that instrument case, he brought out a spectroscope. He turned back to the mattress and mounted it on the bed. He turned back the mattress and mounted it on the bedstead. Cover that pane. Carnes did so, and the doctor swung the receiving tube of the instrument until it pointed at the covered pane. He glanced into the eyepiece and then held a tiny flashlight for an instant opposite the third tube. Uncover that pane. Carnes took down the glass plate and the doctor gazed into the instrument. He made some adjustments. Are you familiar with spectroscopy, Admiral? Somewhat. Take a squint in here and tell me what you see. On that note, I'm gonna be right back, and we'll finish up this story, and that'll be paper cuts for the evening. So, see you all in just a moment. I'd firmly suggest getting up, doing some stretches, jumping jacks, maybe get yourself a cup of tea, depending on what time it is, maybe some snacks. See you in a few. The Admiral applied his eye to the instrument and looked long and earnestly. There are some lines here, Doctor, but your instrument is terribly out of adjustment, you see. They're in what should be the ultraviolet sector, according to your scale. I forgot to tell you. This is a fluoroscopic spectroscope designed for the detection of ultraviolet lines. Those lines you see are ultraviolet, made visible to the eye by the activation of a radioactive compound whose rays turn impinged on a zinc blend sheet. Do you recognize the lines? No, I don't. Small wonder. I doubt whether there are a dozen people who would. I've never seen them before myself, although I recognize them from descriptions I've read. Bolton, come here. Sight along this instrument and through that plate of glass which Carnes is holding. Tell me what office that window belongs to. Bolton sighted as directed, up at the side of the state. War and Navy building.
I can't tell exactly at this time of night, Doctor, but I'll go into the building and find out.
Do so. You've got a flashlight, I assume?
Yes.
Flash it momentarily out of each of the suspected windows in turn, until you get an answering flash from here. When you do, flash it out of each pane of glass in the window, until you get another flash from here. Then come back and tell me what office it is. Mark the pane so we can locate it again in the morning.
It's the office of the Assistant to the Adjutant General of the Army,
reported Bolton 10 minutes later. What is there in the room?
Nothing but the usual desks and chairs.
I suspected as much. The window's merely a reflector. That's all we can do for tonight. Gentlemen, Admiral, keep your patient quiet and in a room with glass windows, preferably with the shades drawn until further notice. Bolton, meet me here, with Carnes, at sunrise. Have a picked detail of 10 men standing by when we can get a hold of them in a hurry. In the meantime, get the Chief of Air Service out of bed, and have him order a plane at Langley Field to be ready to take off at 6 a.m. He's not to take off, however, until I give him orders to do so, do you understand? Everything will be ready for you, Doctor, but I confess I don't know what you're on about.
It's the biggest case you've ever tackled, old man, and I hope that we can pull it off successfully. I'd like to go over it with you now, but I'll be busy at the bureau for the rest of the night. Drop me off there, will you?
At sunrise the next morning, Bolton met Dr. Bird at the entrance to the White House grounds.
Where's your detail?
Where's your detail?
In the State War and Navy building.
Good. I want to go to the solarium, put a light on the place where the president's pillow was last night, and mark that pane of quartz we were looking through. Then we'll join the detail.
Dr. Bird then indeed placed the light and walked with Carnes across the White House grounds. Bolton's badge secured admission to the War, State, and Navy building for the party, and they made their way to the office of the Assistant to the Adjutant General.
Did you mark the pane of glass through which you flashed your light last night, Bolton?
The detective touched one of the panes.
Good. I noticed that this window has hooks for a window washer's belt. Get a life belt, would you?
When the belt was brought, the doctor turned to Carnes.
Carnes, hook on this lifesaver and climb out onto the window ledge. Take this piece of apparatus with you.
He handed Carnes a piece of apparatus which looked like two telescopes fastened to a base, with a screw adjustment for altering the angles of the barrels. Carnes took it and looked at it inquiringly. Also, we're on the last story for the issue. Nice.
This is what I was making at the bureau last night. It's a device that will enable me to locate the source of the beam, which was reflected from this pane of glass onto the president's pillow. I'll show you how to work it. You know when light is reflected, the angle of reflection always equals the angle of incidence? Well, you place these 3 feet against the pane of glass, thus putting the base of the instrument in a plane parallel to the pane of glass. By turning these 2 knobs, one of which gives lateral and the other vertical adjustment, you'll manipulate the instrument until the first telescope is pointing directly toward the president's pillow. Now notice that the 2 telescope barrels are fastened together and are connected to the knobs so that when the knobs are turned, the scopes are turned in equal opposite amounts. When one is turned from its present position 5 degrees to the west, the other automatically turns 5 degrees to the east. When one is elevated, the other is correspondingly depressed. Thus, when the first tube points toward the pillow, the other will point toward the source of the reflected beam.
Clever.
It's rather crude, might not be accurate enough to locate the source exactly, but it'll give us a pretty good idea of where to look. Given time, a much more accurate instrument could have been made, but there were 2 telescopic rifle sights and a theodolite base were all the materials that I could work with. Climb out, Carnes, and do your stuff.
Carnes climbed out onto the window and fastened the hooks of the lifesaver to the rings set in the window casings. He set the base of the instrument against the pane of the glass and manipulated the telescope knobs as Dr. Bird signaled from the inside. The scientist was hard to please with the adjustment, but at last the crosshairs of the first telescope were centered on the light in the solarium. He changed his position and stared through the second tube.
The angle is too acute and the distance too great for accuracy. The beam comes from the roof of a house along Pennsylvania Avenue, but I can't tell from here which one it is. Take a look, Bolton.
The chief of the Secret Service stared through the telescope.
I couldn't be sure, Doctor, but I can see something on the roof of one of the houses, but I can't tell what it is, and I couldn't tell the house when I got in front of it.
It won't do to make a false move. Did you arrange for that plane?
Just waiting for your orders at the field, Doctor.
Good. I'll go up to the office of the Chief of the Air Service and get in touch with the pilot over the Chief's private line. There are some orders I wish to give him and some signals to be arranged.
Dr. Bird returned a few scant minutes later.
The plane's taking off now and be over the city soon. We'll take a stroll down the avenue until we're in the vicinity of the house, and then wait for the plane. Carnes will take 5 of your men and go behind the house, and the rest of us will go in front. Which building do you think it is, Bolton?
About the 4th from the corner.
All right, the men going down the back will take station behind the house next to the corner, and the rest of us will get in front of the same building. When the plane comes over, watch it. If you receive no signal, go to the next house, and wait for him to make a loop and come over you again. Continue this until the pilot throws a white parachute over. That's the signal that we're covering the right house. When you get that signal, Cons, leave the 2 men outside and break in with the other 3. Get that apparatus on the roof and the men who are operating it. Bolton and I will attack the front door at the same time. Does everybody understand? And murmurs of assent came from the detail. All right, let's go. Cons, lead out with your men and go half a block ahead, so that the 2 parties will arrive in the position at about the same time. Carnes left the building with 5 of the operatives, and Dr. Bird and Bolton waited a few minutes and then started down Pennsylvania Avenue, the 5 men of their squad following at intervals. For 3/4 of a mile they sauntered down the street.
This should be it, Doctor.
I think so, and here comes our plane. They watched the swift scout. They watched the swift scout plane from Langley Field. Let's try that one more time. They watched the swift scout plane from Langley Field swing down low over the house, and then swoop up into the sky again without making a signal. The party walked down the street 1 house and paused. Again the plane swept over them without sign. As they stopped in front of the next house, a white parachute flew from the cockpit of the plane, and the aircraft, its mission accomplished, veered off to the south, toward its hangar.
This is the place. Peggy and Johnson, you 2 cover the street. We must take the lower floor. The rest of you come with me.
Followed closely by Dr. Bird and 2 operatives, Bolton sprinted across the street and up the steps, leading to the main entrance of the house. The door was barred, and he hurled his weight against it without result. One side, Bolton. The diminutive chief drew aside, and Dr. Bird's 200 pounds of bone and muscle crashed against the door. The lock gave, and the doctor barely saved himself from sprawling headlong on the hall floor. A woman's scream rang out, and the doctor swore under his breath. Upstairs to the roof. Followed by the rest of the party, he sprinted up the stairway which opened before him. Just as he reached the top, his way was barred by an Amazonian figure in a green bathrobe. Who the devil are you?
Police, one side.
One side, is it? The devil will stop you go until you tell me your business. What the devil are you doing in the house of a respectable female at this hour in the morning?
One side, I tell you,
cried Bolton as he strove to push past the figure that barred the way. Oh, you would, you? Demanded the Irish woman as she grasped Bolton by the collar and shook him as a terrier does a rat. Dr. Bird stifled his laughter with difficulty and seized her by the arm. With a heave on Bolton's collar, she raised him from the ground and swung him against the doctor, knocking him off his feet. Help, police! Damn it, woman, we're on. Dr. Bird's voice was cut short by the sound of a pistol shot from the roof, followed by 2 others. The Irish woman dropped to Bolton and slumped into a sitting position, screaming lustily. Bolton and Bird, with the 2 operatives at their heels, raced for the roof, and before they reached it, another volley of shots rang out, these sounding from the rear of the building. They made their way to an upper floor and found a ladder running to a skylight in the roof. At the foot of the ladder stood one of Carnes's party.
What is it, Williams?
I don't know, Chief. Carnes and the other 2 went up there, and then, well, you see, I heard shooting. My orders would let no one come down the ladder. As he spoke, Carnes's head appeared at the skylight.
It's the right place, all right, Doctor. Come on up. The shooting's all over.
Dr. Bird mounted the ladder and stepped out onto the roof. Set on one edge was a large piece of apparatus, toward which the scientist eagerly hastened. He bent over it for a few moments and then straightened up. Where's the operator? Carnes silently led the way over to the edge of the roof and pointed down. Dr. Bird leaned over, and at the foot of the fire escape, he saw a crumpled, dark heap, with a Secret Service operator bending over him. Is he dead?
Is he dead, Olmsted?
Dead as a mackerel. Richard got him through the head on his first shot.
Good business. We probably never would have secured a conviction. The matters better hushed up anyway. Bolton, have 2 of your men help me get this apparatus back to the bureau. I'd like to examine it. Have the body taken to the morgue and shut up the press. Find out which room the chap occupied, search it, and bring his papers to me. From a criminal standpoint, this case is settled, but I'd like to look into the scientific end of it a little more.
I'd like to know what that was all about, Doctor, but I followed your lead blindly, and now I have a housebreaking without such wise and a killing housebreak, and still am about as much in the dark as I was at the beginning.
Excuse me, Bolton, I didn't mean to slight you. Admiral Clay wants to know about it, so does Carnes, although he knows me too well to say so. As soon as I've digested our case, I'll let you know, and I'll go over the whole thing with you.
A week later, Dr. Bird sat in conference with the President in the executive office of the White House. Beside him sat Admiral Clay, Carnes, and Bolton.
I've told the President as much as I know, Doctor.
Wait, no, this is the Admiral. I have told the President as much as I know, Doctor, and he'd like to hear the details from your lips. He is fully recovered from his malady, and there's no danger of exciting him.
I cannot read Russian, and so was forced to depend on one of my assistants to translate the papers which Mr. Bolton found in Sakowski's room. There's nothing in them to definitely connect him with the Russian Union of Soviet Republics, but with the Russian Union of Soviet Republics, but there's little doubt in my mind that he was a Red, that Russia supplied the money which he spent. It would be disastrous to Russia's plans to have too close an accord between this country and the British Empire, and I have no doubt that the coming visit of Premier MacDougall was the underlying cause of the attempt. So much for that reason. As for how I came to suspect what was happening, the explanation is very simple. When Carnes first told me of your malady, Mr. President, I happened to be checking von Bayer's results in the alleged discovery of a new element, luninium. In the article describing his experience, von Bayer mentions that when he tried to observe the spectra, he encountered a mild form of ophthalmia which was quite stubborn to treatment. He also mentions a peculiar mental unbalance and intense exhilaration, which the rays seemed to cause in both himself and his assistants. The analogy between his observations and your case struck me at once. For ages the moon has been an object of worship by various religious sects, and some of the most obscene orgies of which we have record occurred in the moonlight. The full moon seems to affect dogs to a state of partial hypnosis, with consequent howling and evident pain in the eyes. Certain feeble-minded persons have been known to be adversely affected by moonlight, as well as some cases of complete mental aberration. In other words, while moonlight has no practical effect on the average human in its usual concentration, it does have an adverse effect on certain types of mentality, and despite the laughter of medical science, there seems to be something in the theory of moon madness. This effect of von Bayer attributed to the emanations of luninium, which element he detected in the spectra of the moon, in the form of a wide band, in the ultraviolet region. I obtained from Carnes a history of your case, and when I found that your attacks grew violent with the full moon and subsided with the new moon, I was sure that I was on the right track, and although I had, at that time, no way of knowing whether it was from natural or artificial causes, the effect was being produced. I interviewed Admiral Clay and found that you were suffering from a form of dementis, resembling sunburn, and that convinced me that attack was being made on your sanity, for an excess of ultraviolet light will always tend to produce sunburn. I inquired about the windows of your solarium, for the ultraviolet light will not pass through a normal lead glass. When the Admiral told me that the glass had been replaced with fused quartz, which is quite permeable to ultraviolet, and found that the change had been almost coincident with the start of your malady, I asked him to get you out of the solarium and let me examine it. By means of certain fluorescent substances that I used, I found that your pillow was being bathed in a flood of ultraviolet light, and the fluorospectroscope told me that luminium emanations were present in large quantities. These rays were not coming to you directly from their source, but from one of the windows of the War, State, and Navy building, being used as a reflector. I located the approximate source of the ray by means of an improvised apparatus, and we surrounded the place. Stokowski was killed while attempting to escape, and I suppose that's about all there is to it.
Thank you, Doctor. I would be interested in a description of the apparatus which was be used to produce this effect.
The apparatus was quite simple, sir. It was a large collector of moonlight which was thrown after collection into aluminium plate. The resultant emanations were turned into a parallel beam by a parabolic reflector and focused through a rock crystal lens with an extremely long focal length into your pillow.
Then
Stokowski isolated von Bayer's new element.
I'm still in doubt whether it's a new element or merely an allotropic modification of the common element cadmium. The plate which he used has a very peculiar property. When moonlight or any other reflected light where was I? I'm still in doubt that it's, when moonlight or any other reflected light of the same composition falls on it, it acts on the ray much as the button of a Roentgen tube acts on a cathode ray. As the cathode ray is absorbed in entirely a new ray, the X-ray is given off by the button, just so that the reflected moonlight absorbed in a new ray of ultraviolet given off. This is the ray which von Bayer detected. I thought that I could catch traces of von Bayer's lines in my spectroscope, and I think now that it is due to a trace of luninium in the cadmium plating of the barrels. Von Bayer could have easily made the same mistake. Von Bayer's work, together with Stokowski's work, opens up an entirely new field of spectroscopic research. I would give a good deal to go over to Baden and go into the matter with von Bayer and make some plans for exploration of the new trip. You see,
I think the United States owes you that trip, Dr. Bird. Make your plans to go as soon as you get your data together. I think that the Treasury will be able to take care of your expense without raising the income tax next year.
Alright. So now, we just have a list of things that are going to be on the next issue. And then Reader's Corner, informal meeting place for all the readers of Astounding Stories. Please write in. I don't know if they still do that now. I know they do have a Reader's Corner. I don't know if it's still like a letter portion. Let's read the letters to the editor. We got time. Dear Editor, I received a pleasant surprise a few days ago when I found a new science fiction magazine at the newsstand, Astounding Stories, and I was still more pleased and surprised to find that the editor seems to know that such stories should have a real story interest beside a scientific idea. Of course, I took with a grain of salt the invitation to write to the editor and give my preference to the kind of stories I like. I know that every editor down in his heart thinks his magazine is as perfect as is. In fact, praise is what they want, not suggestions, judging by the letters they print. Well, I can conscientiously give you some praise. If Astounding Stories keeps up to the standard of the first issue, it'll be all right. Evidently, you can afford to hire the best writers obtainable. Notice you've signed up some of my favorites. Murray Leinster, R.F. Starzl, Ray Cummings. I like their stuff. It has a rare quality rather vaguely described as distinction, which make the story remembered for a long time. The story Tanks by Murray Leinster is my idea of what a story should be. The author doesn't start out, "Listen, my children, and you'll hear a story so wonderful you wouldn't believe it. Only after the death of the Professor Bulging Dome do I dare to make it public to a doubting world." No, he simply proceeds to tell the story. If I were reading in the Saturday Evening Post or the Ladies' Home Journal, it'd be all right to prepare me for the story by explaining that, of course, the author doesn't vouch for the story, it having been told to him by a crazy Eurasian at a cottage grove back in Tan Speakeasy at 3:30 in the morning. In Astounding Stories, I expect the story to be unusual. Don't bother telling me it's so. That criticism applies to Phantoms of Reality, which is a story above the average, though, despite its rather flat title and slow beginning. See, I would have given Tanks the description of flat title and slow beginning. Also, it has slow middle and slow end. Here's another good point about Tanks. Its characters are human. Some authors of stories of the future make the characters all brains, cold monsters, no humanity in them. Such a story has neither human interest nor plausibility. The sky's the limit, I say, for mechanical or scientific accomplishments, but human emotions will be the same 1,000 years from now. And even supposing they'll be changed, your readers have present-day emotions. The magazine can't prosper unless those present-day emotions are aroused and mirrored by thoroughly human characters. The situation may just be as outre as you'd like. The more unusual, the better, honestly. But it's the response of the normal human emotions to most unusual situations that gives magazines such as yours its powerful and unique kick. The response of 2 infantrymen and tanks to the strange and terrifying new warfare of the future exemplifies another point I'd like to make. The fact that no matter what marvels the future may bring, the people who live them take them in a matter-of-fact way. Their conversation will be cigarettes, sag-paced drinks, women. References to the scientific marvels around them will be casual and sketchy. How many million words of an average car owner's conversation would you have to report to give a visitor from 1700 an idea of an internal combustion engine? The author, if skillful, can convey that information in other ways. Yet a lot of stories printed have long, stilted conversations in which the author thinks he's conveying in an entertaining way his foundation situation. Personally, I like a lot of physical action, violent action preferred. This is so properly because I'm a school teacher and I'm just so sedentary in my habits. I've never written a story in my life, but I'm the most voracious consumer of stories in Chicago. I like to see the hero get the devil of a pickle and smash his way out. I like 'em big, tough, and kind to their grandmothers. It seems to me that interplanetary stories offer the best vehicle for all the desirable qualities herein, enumerated combined. There's absolutely no restraint on the imagination except a few known astronomical facts, plenty of opportunity for violent and dangerous adventures, strange and terrestrial impossible monsters. The human actors, set down in the midst of such terrifying conditions which they battle dauntlessly, gritting as they take their blows and returning them with goodwill, cannot fail to rouse the admiration of the reader and make him buy the next month's issue, of course. But spare us, please, the stories in which the hero, arriving on some other planet, is admitted to the court of the king of the white race and leads their battles against the reds, the browns, the greens, and so on, eventually marrying the king's daughter, who is always golden-haired, of milky white complexion and large blue eyes. Kindly rejects stories of interplanetary travel, in which a member of the party turns against the Earth party and allies himself with a worm like moon men or what have you. Stories in which the great inventor has gone crazy to threaten to hurl the Earth into the sun leave me cold and despondent, for the simple reason that crazy men are never great inventors. Name a great inventor who wasn't perfectly sane if you can. Tesla? The author makes the great inventor insane to make it plausible that he should want to destroy the world. And if he's a good author, he can find some other motive. One more thing. I like to smell, feel, hear, and even taste the action of a story as well as see it. Some authors only let you see it, and then they don't tell you whether it's in bright or subdued light. The author of Tanks fulfills my requirements in this respect, at least partially. Walter Boyle, care of Mrs. Anna Treats, 4751 North Artesian, Chicago, Illinois. Well, Anna Treats, I firmly disagree with your arguments here, but I won't go into it. Oh, I just firmly disagree. I dislike Tanks a great deal. I agree that you need to let the author, you need to let the viewer feel your story. I agree that you shouldn't exposit in dialogue as well, because I'm a big fan of just expositing ad nauseum in my writing to just do, to explain, oh, this lore thing, that lore thing, this lore thing. I love doing that. And I'm going to do, I exposit at length, that's a thing I do, but I don't have the, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't have the characters talk about it. Because naturally, you wouldn't say, you turn to your buddy and be like, hey man, check out this thing that's in our daily lives. Like, if it was a thing that's like cutting edge, you might be like, whoa, dude, check out this self-driving car. I just got it the other day. Isn't it sick? But, like, you wouldn't explain how it works unless you're, like, a big computer science nerd like me. But anyway, I digress a great deal. I disagree with that letter. Tanks was awful. Anyway, moving on to the next letter. Dear Editor, I want to thank you for the very entertaining hours I spent perusing your new magazine, Astounding Stories. I read 1 or 2 of the science fiction magazines, and it seems like the tales of this sort intrigue me. However, I wish to say that the debut number of your magazine contained the best stories I'll ever read. I'll thank you and assure you that should the stories continue, I'll be a permanent reader. Irving E. Ettinger, The Seville, Detroit, Michigan. Dear Editor, I'm well pleased with your new magazine and wish you to offer my congratulations and best wishes. As I'm well acquainted with most of the science fiction now being written, I'm in a good position to criticize your magazine. First of all, the color illustration's good, but inside drawings could be greatly improved. See, my copy doesn't even have the inside drawings. I just left them out, man. Second, holding the magazine together with two staples is a good idea. Third, the paper could be improved. Buddy, it's a pulp. You're not going to get good paper out of a pulp. Fourth, the price is right. Here I classify the stories. Excellent. The Beetle Horde and tanks. Why are y'all so into tanks? It was a snooze fest. Very good. Cape of Horror, Invisible Death, and Phantoms of Reality. Medium, Compensation, and Poor, Stolen Mind. Please don't reprint any of Poe's, Wells, or Verne's work. My prejudice to Poe, Wells, and Verne is that I've read all their works in other magazines. However, with all my criticizing, I think your magazine's a good one. James Nichols, 1509 19th Street, Bakersfield, California. Hang on. I'm just gonna leave the rest of these letters for later, so we can come back, so I can see what y'all think about the letters section. And I can either come back to it next week, or just move on to the next issue next week. So please, throw me a comment down in the comment section. As for live chat, I don't think you can. I mean, if one of you is here, please yell, scream, shout about it. But I think the letters are interesting. I don't know that I would want to have them read aloud to me. I don't know if it fits the format I'm doing here. But hey, if you want it, scream shout in the comments. Anyway, guys, this has been Paper Cuts. I just enjoy doing this so much. So thanks for tuning in, folks. This has been Paper Cuts. I hope it didn't sting.